Hey, how did you sleep last night? If you're a fan of scary stories to fall asleep to, you've found the right place. Welcome to Midnight Lullaby. A like and a subscribe means a lot to this channel, and make sure we will meet again. Also, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Now, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let the story carry you into dreams. Story 1. The cornfield was burning when we drove past. Not actively aflame. Those fires had been weeks ago, maybe months, but burned. Blackened stalks stood like charred fingers, reaching toward an overcast Iowa sky, acre after acre of destruction, stretching away from Highway 63 in both directions. The air that seeped through the car's ventilation system carried the acrid smell of ash and scorched earth. Jesus, Marcus said from the driver's seat. That must have been one hell of a fire. I didn't respond. I was watching the burned field roll past, looking for any sign of green, any indication that life was returning to all that blackness. There was none, just ash and char, and the skeletal remains of what had been, presumably someone's livelihood. We were driving from Chicago to Denver, taking the scenic route because we had time and because Marcus's Civic had just hit 200,000 miles and he wanted to give her one last adventure before trading up. I'd agreed to come along because I was between jobs, between apartments, between everything really. And a road trip seemed like the right, kind of aimless activity for someone in my situation. We'd been driving for 6 hours, stopping only for gas and bathroom breaks, when we entered this stretch of Iowa farmland. The burned field appeared suddenly after miles of living corn, a stark black wound in the landscape's green expanse. There, I said, pointing ahead. Pull over there. A gravel turnoff led to a small parking area beside a historical marker. Marcus pulled in, and we both got out, stretching our cramped legs. The marker was weathered, the text barely legible, something about indigenous trading routes and early settlers. But that wasn't what had caught my attention. Beyond the marker, a dirt path led into the burned field. And about 100 yards down that path, I could see a structure. A well, I thought, though it was hard to tell from this distance. Want to stretch our legs? Marcus asked, already starting down the path without waiting for an answer. I followed, partly because standing alone beside the highway seemed worse than walking through a burned cornfield, and partly because something about that structure interested me in a way I couldn't explain. It stood out against all that destruction, solid and intact when everything else had been consumed. The smell was worse inside the field. Not just ash, but something organic and wrong, like meat left too long in the sun. Our feet crunched on blackened earth as we walked, leaving footprints in the ash. The structure was indeed a well, an old one, built from stones that had been mortared together decades, or maybe centuries ago. It was about 4 feet across, the stones rising to waist height before ending in empty air. No roof, no bucket system, no rope. Just a dark hole descending into the earth. Marcus reached it first and leaned over to look down. Can't see the bottom. Must be deep. I approached more cautiously. There was something about the well that made me uneasy, though I couldn't articulate what. Maybe it was just the contrast. This intact structure in the middle of so much destruction, as if the fire had flowed around it like water around a stone. I was still 10 feet away when I saw the man. He appeared from behind a stand of burned stalks, so suddenly that both Marcus and I jumped. He was old, maybe 70, with the kind of weathered face you see on farmers who've spent decades under the sun. He wore overalls and worked boots, and his hands were stained with something dark that might have been soil or oil or something else. "Help you boys?" he asked. His voice was flat, neither friendly nor hostile. "Just stretching our legs," Marcus said quickly. "Sorry if we're trespassing. We'll head back to the car." The old man's eyes moved from Marcus to me, then to the well, then back to me. "See anything?" I repeated, not understanding. "In the well. You looked down in there yet?" "No," I said. "We just got here." The old man nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something. Probably for the best. Nothing good comes from looking too close at some things. He turned to go, then paused. Fire was months ago. August. Hottest August on record. Lightning strikes started it, they said. Burned 200 acres before they got it under control. "It's your field?" Marcus asked. "Mine and my neighbor's." He lost more than I did. The old man looked back at the well. Strange thing, though. Fire burned right up to that well, then stopped. Perfect circle around it, maybe 20 feet across. Not a single stalk touched on this side. On the other side, everything gone. I looked at the ground around the well and saw he was right. The burned area ended in an almost perfect curve, as if an invisible barrier had protected this small section. "How is that possible?" I asked. The old man shrugged. "Winds, maybe. Or just luck. Though folks around here, some of them say it's because the well's been here longer than anything else. Longer than the farms, longer than the town. Indian well, they think, though nobody knows for sure. Been here as long as anyone can remember, and nobody's ever filled it in. Something about it doesn't feel right to fill in. You understand?" I didn't, but I nodded anyway. The old man started walking away, then called back without turning. "Best to leave it be. And don't look too close if you do decide to peer down there. Some things you see, you can't unsee." We watched him disappear into the burned field, his figure growing smaller until the ash and smoke, damaged air made him indistinct, then invisible. "Friendly guy," Marcus said dryly. "Come on, let's head back. This place is giving me the creeps," but I'd already moved closer to the well. The old man's warning had done exactly what warnings like that always do. Made me desperately curious about what I wasn't supposed to see. I reached the stone rim and leaned forward to look down. The well was deep, deeper than seemed possible. The walls were stone, darker than the rim, and they descended into blackness that my eyes couldn't penetrate. I could smell water, that particular mineral scent of underground streams, and something else. Something that reminded me of the smell we'd encountered walking through the field, but concentrated, more intense. I was about to pull back when I saw movement. Not at the bottom of the well. I still couldn't see the bottom. But on the walls, maybe 20 feet down. Something pale moving against the dark stone. I squinted, trying to understand what I was seeing. It was a hand, a child's hand, small and pale, fingers splayed against the stone, as if groping for purchase on the slick surface. As I watched, frozen in shock, the hand moved higher, and I could see the arm attached to it, thin and unnaturally white. Then a face appeared in the darkness below. A child's face, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with blonde hair plastered to their skull with moisture. The child was looking up at me with eyes that seemed too large, too dark, and their mouth was open in what might have been a scream or a gasp or a plea for help. "Marcus," I said, my voice coming out as a whisper. "Marcus, there's someone down there." "What?" He was beside me in an instant, leaning over the well. But when I looked down again, the child was gone. Just darkness and stone, and that smell rising from the depths. "I don't see anything," Marcus said, pulling back. "Are you sure?" "There was a kid," I insisted. "A little boy, I think. Blonde hair. He was climbing the wall like he was trying to get out." Marcus gave me a look that was equal parts concern and skepticism. Dude, there's no way. That well has to be 40, 50 feet deep. Nobody could survive a fall like that, and even if they did, they couldn't climb those walls. They're smooth stone. I saw what I saw. Maybe it was a reflection, or shadows, but I knew what I'd seen. That small face looking up at me, those two large eyes, that open mouth, and the hand groping at the stone like something drowning reaches for air. We need to call someone, I said, already pulling out my phone. Even if I'm wrong, we need to check. No signal. Marcus said, checking his own phone. We're in the middle of nowhere. We'd have to drive back to that town we passed 20 miles ago. I looked down into the well again, half expecting to see the child's face staring back up at me. There was nothing but darkness. Then we drive. Come on, wait. Marcus grabbed my arm. Let's think about this. If there really is someone down there, and I'm not saying there is, but if there is, what are we going to tell people? That we saw a kid climbing up a 50-foot well. They're going to think we're insane. I don't care what they think. We have to report it. Marcus said, holding up his hands. Okay, we'll report it. But let's at least drive back to the highway, find the nearest town with a police station, and tell them in person. That seems more credible than calling 911 and trying to explain this over the phone. He was right, even though every instinct in me was screaming to do something immediately. We walked quickly back through the burned field to the car. I kept looking back at the well, half expecting to see a small figure climb out of it, but it remained empty and silent. We drove east for 20 minutes before we found a town, if you could call it that. More like a cluster of buildings at a crossroads, a gas station, a post office, a church with a white steeple, and a diner called the Harvest Moon. A sign proclaimed this to be Ashford, population 347. We parked in front of the diner, which seemed to be the only place showing signs of life. Through the windows, we could see half a dozen people scattered among the booths and counter seats. Inside, the diner was exactly what you'd expect. Vinyl booths, a long counter with red, topped stools, black and white photographs of the town from various decades on the walls. The few patrons looked up when we entered, their conversations dying mid-sentence. A waitress appeared from the kitchen, an older woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun. Help you boys. We need to report something, I said. Is there a police station in town? Her expression shifted, became guarded. Sheriff's office is in Fairmont, 20 miles west. Deputy usually comes through here around 5 if you want to wait. She checked her watch. That's about 2 hours from now. This is urgent. I insisted. There might be someone in trouble. What kind of trouble? The question came from one of the booths, where an older man in a feed store cap sat with a coffee. I hesitated, aware that everyone in the diner was now watching us. We were out by the burned cornfield. There's a well there, old stone well. I looked down into it and I think I saw a child. A little boy. The silence that followed was absolute. The waitress's face had gone carefully blank. The man in the feed store cap slowly set down his coffee cup. You saw Edmund Harrow's well, the man said finally. I don't know whose well it is. It's just out there in the burned field. About 100 yards off Highway 63. That's Edmund's land, and that's his well. The man exchanged looks with the other patrons. And you say you saw a boy down in it? I think so. I mean, yes. Definitely yes. He had blonde hair, and he was trying to climb out. Another pause. Then the waitress said, carefully, what exactly did this boy look like? I described what I'd seen. The pale skin, the blonde hair, the child's face looking up at me from the darkness. As I spoke, I watched the expressions around the diner shift from suspicion to something else. Something that might have been fear, or might have been anger, or might have been both. That's quite a story. The man in the feed store cap said finally. Quite a story indeed. It's not a story, I said, frustration rising. I'm telling you what I saw. If there's a child trapped down there. There's no child trapped down there, a new voice said. I turned to see an elderly man standing in the doorway to the kitchen. He was tall and lean, with the same weathered face as the farmer we'd encountered at the well. In fact, I realized with a start it might have been the same man, though I couldn't be certain. How can you be sure? Marcus asked. Because, the man said, moving to the counter, that well's been checked more times than I can count. It gets checked every few years when someone new comes through and sees what you saw, or thinks they saw. The bottom's solid stone, no water in it anymore. And sure as hell no child. But I saw. You saw what you wanted to see. The man interrupted. Or what you expected to see. Mind plays tricks when you're staring down into darkness. Always has. I know what I saw. I insisted. The man studied me for a long moment. You from around here? Chicago. We're just passing through. Figures. He turned to the waitress. Ladies, get these boys some coffee. On the house. They've had a long drive, probably tired. Seeing things that aren't there. I don't want coffee, I said. I want someone to check that well. A child's life might be in danger. No danger, the man said flatly. But if it'll make you feel better, I'll give Sheriff Carter a call, have him send someone out to take a look. Won't be today, probably tomorrow morning. That satisfy you? It didn't. Not remotely, but I could see I wasn't going to get anywhere with these people. There was something wrong here, something in the way they were all so quick to dismiss what I'd seen, so eager to explain it away. Fine. Yes, please call him. Need a phone number where he can reach you, the man said. I gave him my cell number. He wrote it down on a napkin with exaggerated care, then folded the napkin and tucked it into his shirt pocket. There we go. All taken care of. Thank you, Marcus said, putting a hand on my arm in a gesture that clearly meant let's get out of here. We appreciate your help. We turned to leave, but the man's voice stopped us at the door. Word of advice. Keep driving. Don't stop in these parts again. Things have a way of getting complicated for folks who don't understand local matters. Outside, the late afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the empty street. We got in the car without speaking. That was weird, Marcus said finally as he started the engine. They're covering something up. Or they're just small, town people who don't like outsiders making accusations. He pulled out of the parking lot. Look, we reported it. We did what we could. If there really is someone down there, there is. Then the sheriff will find them when he checks tomorrow. Our job is done. Let's just get back on the road, okay? But I couldn't let it go. Something about the way those people had reacted, the way they'd all exchanged those careful looks, the way they'd been so quick to dismiss what I'd seen, and that old man's warning, keep driving. Don't stop in these parts again. I want to go back, I said. What? No, absolutely not. Marcus, something is wrong. You didn't see their faces. They know something about that well. Something they're not telling us. Probably because there's nothing to tell. You saw shadows or a reflection or something, and now we're making a big deal out of nothing. Then why did they act so strange? Because we were acting strange! We walked into their diner and started talking about children trapped in wells. Of course, they thought we were crazy. We argued about it for the next hour as we drove west. putting distance between ourselves and Ashford. Marcus wanted to keep going, to treat the whole thing as a bizarre detour and nothing more. I wanted to turn around, to find the nearest state police office and report what I'd seen to someone who didn't have a vested interest in covering it up. In the end, we compromised. We'd stop at the next major town, find a motel, and in the morning, I could call the sheriff's office in Fairmont and follow up. If they'd checked the well and found nothing, I'd let it go. If they hadn't checked it, I'd insist they do so immediately. The motel was in a town called Cedar Falls, 40 miles from Ashford. We got a room with 2 beds, ordered pizza, and spent the evening watching cable television and not talking about the well or what I'd seen or what the people in that diner had said. I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to Marcus's steady breathing from the other bed and thinking about that pale face looking up at me from the darkness. Those 2 large eyes, that open mouth. Around midnight, my phone rang. I grabbed it, seeing an unknown number. Hello. Is this the young man who was asking about Edmund Harrow's well? The voice was elderly female. Uncertain. Yes. Who is this? My name is Martha Keene. I was in the diner this afternoon, though I didn't speak up. I wanted to wait until I could call you privately. I sat up, fully awake now. Do you know something about the well? A long pause. I don't know if what you saw was real, but I believe you saw something. And I think you deserve to know the history. I'm listening. The well has been there for over 100 years. Before the town, before the farms. Nobody knows who built it or why. But there have always been stories about it. Stories about things seen down in the darkness. Usually children, though sometimes other things. Other things. Faces. Figures. Things that shouldn't be there but are somehow. Most folks who see them do what you did. Report it, insist someone check. And someone always does check. And they always find the same thing, nothing. An empty well, stone bottom, no water, no children. But people keep seeing them. Yes, every few years someone new comes through, looks down into that well and sees something. Always the same description. Pale skin, dark eyes, reaching up from the darkness. And always the town reacts the same way. Dismisses it, explains it away, tells the person to move on. Why? Because, Martha said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, of what happened 23 years ago. She told me the story then, speaking quickly as if afraid she'd lose her nerve. 23 years ago, in the summer of 2000, a family had moved to Ashford. The Bishops, parents, and their 6-year-old son, David. The boy had been blond and small for his age, and by all accounts a happy, curious child. One August afternoon, David had gone missing. The whole town had searched for 3 days, checking every building, every field, every ditch and culvert. They found nothing. On the 4th day, Edmund Harrow had reported seeing something in his well. A child's hand reaching up from the darkness. The sheriff had organized a rescue operation. Men with ropes and climbing equipment descending into the well, which they discovered was nearly 60 feet deep. They found David Bishop at the bottom. He'd been dead for at least 2 days. How he'd gotten into the well, why he'd been there, what he'd been doing out in that field alone, nobody could say. The well had no rope, no bucket, no easy way for a child to access it. But somehow he'd fallen in, and he'd died down there in the dark. The family had left town immediately after the funeral. The well had been examined, and for a brief period, there was talk of filling it in. But Edmund Harrow had refused. It was his property, he'd insisted, and he wanted it left alone. The talk died down. Life returned to normal. Except that people kept seeing David Bishop in the well. Not his body, that had been buried in the town cemetery. But his image, his ghost, whatever you wanted to call it, pale and small, reaching up from the darkness, trying to climb out. Edmund Harrow saw him the most, Martha said. He became obsessed with the well after David died. Would go out there and stand beside it for hours, just staring down into it. People said he was waiting for David to climb out. Said he felt responsible. Like maybe if he'd checked the well sooner, they could have saved him. And the town covers this up. We don't cover it up. We don't encourage people to go looking, because what's there to find? A tragedy from 2 decades ago. A child who died because of a terrible accident. We can't change it. We can't fix it. All we can do is try to move on. But people keep seeing him.
Yes.
And every time someone does, it opens up the wounds again. Reminds us of what happened. Some folks think it's guilt, that we all feel responsible for David, and so we project that guilt into the well, see what we expect to see. Others think it's something else, something to do with the well itself. What do you mean? That well is old. Old in a way that matters out here. The indigenous people avoided that land, according to records from the 1800s. They said the well was there before them, built by people even older. Said it was a threshold place, where the boundary between one world and another was thin. They never filled it in, never disturbed it, and they never went near it alone. Are you saying the well is haunted? I'm saying the well is strange. Has been for longer than any of us have been alive. And David Bishop died there, and now his image appears to people who look too close. Whether that's because of something supernatural or just because of human guilt and psychology, I can't say. But I wanted you to know the truth, or at least the closest thing to truth we have. The man I spoke to at the diner, I said. The old one who offered me coffee. Was that Edmund Harrow? Yes, that was Edmund. He's the one who saw David first, all those years ago, and he's the one who sees him most often now. Some people say Edmund never really left that well, not in any way that matters. Say his mind is still there, still watching, still waiting for David to climb out. We talked for a few more minutes, Martha giving me details about David's death, about the search, about the aftermath. Then she said she had to go, that she'd already said more than she should have, and that I should take her advice and forget about the well, forget about Ashford. Just keep driving and don't look back. I thanked her and hung up. Then I lay in the dark, thinking about a 6-year-old boy named David Bishop, who died in darkness 60 feet underground, and about all the people who'd seen his image reaching up from that same darkness in the 23 years since. In the morning, I called the sheriff's office in Fairmont. A deputy answered, and when I explained why I was calling, there was a long pause. You're calling about the Harrow well, he said finally. It wasn't a question. Yes, I was told someone would check it. We checked it yesterday evening. Well is empty, just like always. No child, no person of any kind. You saw shadows, son. Happens all the time with that particular well. Something about the angle, the depth. People see things. But did you go down into it? Did someone actually descend? We've been down in that well more times than I can count. Most recently about 8 months ago, when some tourists reported the same thing you did. It's 62 feet deep, stone bottom, bone dry. There's nothing down there. Never has been, except for that one time back in 2000, David Bishop. Another pause. So you know about that. Then you understand why we take these reports seriously, even when we know what we're going to find, or not find. The woman I spoke to last night said people keep seeing him. David Bishop. That his image appears in the well? Martha Keene called you. The deputy sighed. Look, I'm not going to tell you what to believe. Some folks around here think that well is haunted. Some think it's just a trick of light and shadow. But I'll tell you what I know for certain. There is no child in that well. There hasn't been for 23 years. Whatever you saw, it wasn't real in any sense that would require police intervention. What if I want to check myself? That's Edmund Harrow's property. You'd be trespassing. And honestly, I'd advise against it. That well, it does something to people. Gets into their heads. You seem like a smart young man. My advice is to forget about it and move on. I thanked him and hung up. Marcus was already awake, sitting on the edge of his bed and watching me. They checked it, I said. Found nothing. So we can let this go. I wanted to say yes. Wanted to accept what I'd been told and move on. Continue our road trip. Forget about the well and David Bishop and Edmund Harrow and everything else. But I couldn't shake the image of that small face looking up at me from the darkness. Couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was too eager to explain it away, too practiced at dismissing what people saw. I need to see for myself, I said. Are you insane? You heard what the deputy said. It's private property. We'd be trespassing. Then I'll go alone. You don't have to come. Marcus stared at me for a long moment. You're really going to do this? I have to. He shook his head, but he was already reaching for his shoes. Fine. But we go in daylight, we don't touch anything, and then we leave. Agreed. Agreed? We drove back to Ashford, then followed the highway east until we found the burned cornfield. The historical marker was still there, the dirt path leading into the blackened landscape. We parked and started walking. The well looked exactly as it had the day before, solid, intact, surrounded by that strange circle of unburned earth. In daylight, with Marcus beside me, it seemed less ominous. Just an old stone structure in a burned field, nothing more. Okay, Marcus said. You wanted to see it again. You've seen it. Can we go now? But I was already moving toward the well, drawn by the same compulsion that had made me look down into it the first time. I reached the stone rim and leaned over to peer into the darkness. Nothing. Just stone walls descending into shadow. No pale face, no reaching hands, no child trying to climb to freedom. I felt an odd mixture of relief and disappointment. Maybe everyone had been right. Maybe I had seen shadows, or a reflection, or my mind had created an image from darkness and suggestion. I was about to pull back when I heard it. A voice, small and distant, echoing up from the depths of the well. Help me. I froze, my hands gripping the stone rim so hard my knuckles turned white. Marcus, did you hear that? Hear what? A voice. From the well, a child's voice. Marcus came to stand beside me, both of us leaning over the opening. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then faint but unmistakable, please. Help me. I want to go home, Jesus Christ, Marcus whispered. There's someone down there. The voice came again, clearer now, more insistent. I'm cold. It's so cold down here. Why won't anyone help me? I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, and turned on the flashlight, pointing it down into the well. The beam illuminated the stone walls, but couldn't reach the bottom. Somewhere in that cone of light, I caught a glimpse of movement. Something pale shifting in the darkness. David. I called down. David Bishop. Well, the voice changed, became sharper, more present. You know my name. You came back for me. I knew someone would come back. We're gonna get help, I said, though I had no idea how we'd do that. Just hold on, okay? Stay calm. I've been holding on. I've been holding on for so long. It's dark here. So dark. And there are things in the dark with me. Things that whisper. Things, Marcus said. What things? The other children. the ones who were here before me. They say this is where children go when they fall through the cracks, when no one's watching, when no one cares enough to find them. The voice was rising now, becoming frantic. But you found me. You're here. You can help me climb out. I looked at Marcus. His face was pale, his eyes wide. We need to call 911. Now. But even as he said it, I heard something else. Another voice, older this time, coming from behind us. Step away from the well. We turned to find Edmund Harrow standing at the edge of the unburned circle, a shotgun held loosely in his hands. Not pointed at us, but present. A statement. Mr. Harrow, I started. There's someone down there. A child, we heard. You heard what you're meant to hear, Harrow interrupted. No, step away from the well and get off my property. You can't be serious, Marcus said. If there's really a child down there, there's no child. There's never a child. Just echoes of what was. Harrow moved closer, and I could see his face clearly now. It was weathered and worn, but it was his eyes that struck me. They were hollow, haunted. The eyes of someone who'd seen too much and understood too little. David Bishop, I said. You found him. 23 years ago. Harrow's expression didn't change. I found him. Yes. 3 days too late to do any good. Help me. The voice from the well called up again. Please, I'm scared. I want my mother. Harrow flinched at the sound, but didn't move toward the well. That's not David. That's just an echo. A recording that plays back when someone's listening. That well's been playing that recording for 23 years. That doesn't make any sense, I said. No, it doesn't. But it's the truth anyway. Harrow lowered the shotgun slightly. You want to know what really happened? I'll tell you. But then you leave, and you don't come back, and you forget you ever saw this place. We nodded, and Harrow began to speak, his words slow and heavy. David Bishop had indeed gone missing that August day in 2000. The search had been extensive but ultimately fruitless. On the fourth day, Harrow had been checking his fields when he'd heard something. A voice calling from his well, a child's voice begging for help. He'd looked down and seen David, or something that looked like David, reaching up from the darkness. He'd called the sheriff, organized the rescue. Men had descended into the well on ropes, and they'd found David's body at the bottom. But here's what the official reports hadn't included. When they'd brought David up, his body was wrong. Wrong in ways that were hard to articulate but impossible to ignore. His skin was too pale, almost translucent. His eyes were open, but filmed over with something that wasn't quite cataracts. And his hands, the hands that had supposedly been trying to climb the stone walls, were torn to pieces, the fingers worn down to bone. The coroner had ruled it death by exposure and dehydration. The body had been released to the family, buried quickly, and the investigation closed. But everyone who'd been down in that well, everyone who'd seen David's body in situ, knew something was wrong. The well didn't kill David, Harrow said. Or maybe it did, I don't know. But it didn't just hold his body. It kept something of him. An impression, maybe. Like a photograph burned into stone. And now it plays back that impression to anyone who looks too close. Shows them what they expect to see. A child in distress. A life that needs saving. That's impossible, Marcus said. Yeah, it is. But you heard it yourself just now, didn't you? Heard that voice calling for help. Harrow looked at the well with an expression of mingled hatred and fear. I've heard it 1,000 times. Every time I come out here. Every time I check the fields. That voice, always the same, always begging. And I can never save him. Because he's already gone. Has been for 23 years. Why don't you fill in the well? I asked. Put an end to it. Tried. Got equipment out here, started dumping dirt and rocks down there. But the next day, the well was clear again. Empty. Like nothing had been put in it at all. He shook his head. Whatever that well is, it doesn't want to be filled. And I've learned the hard way not to fight with things older than I understand. The voice from the well had gone silent, as if it knew we were talking about it, and was listening. The burned field around us seemed to press in, and I became acutely aware of how isolated we were, how far from help. "We should go," Marcus said quietly, and I knew he was right. But Harrow wasn't finished. "One more thing you should know. David Bishop wasn't the first child found in that well. I did some research after he died. Went through old newspaper archives, talked to the oldest folks in the county. There have been at least 4 other children over the past 100 years. All of them found at the bottom of that well, all of them with the same strange characteristics. And all of them supposedly heard, calling for help before they were found. Jesus, I whispered. So when I tell you to stay away from this well, to forget what you saw and heard, I'm not covering something up. I'm trying to save you from something you can't fight and can't understand. That well draws children to it somehow. Or maybe it draws people who can hear the children. I don't know which. But I know that everyone who spends too much time thinking about it, everyone who tries to solve what happened here, ends up worse off than when they started." He gestured with the shotgun, still not threatening, just indicating. "Now get, and don't come back. Next time I won't be so polite." We backed away from the well, keeping our eyes on Harrow until we'd reached the dirt path. Then we turned and walked quickly back to the car, neither of us speaking until we were on the highway again, putting miles between ourselves and that burned field. "Did that really just happen?" Marcus asked finally. "Yeah, it did. We should report this. Tell someone. The FBI, maybe, or tell them what? That a well is haunted. That it calls to people in a child's voice. That an old man with a shotgun told us to leave his property." I shook my head. Nobody would believe us. Hell, I barely believe us. And I was there. We drove in silence for a while. Then Marcus said, "What do you think really happened to those children?" "I don't know. Maybe they fell in by accident, like everyone says. Or maybe." I trailed off, not wanting to voice the darker possibility that had been growing in my mind. "Maybe the well wanted them," Marcus finished. "Maybe it called to them somehow, and they came, and it took them. That's insane." "Yeah. So is everything else about this situation?" We stopped for gas 2 hours later. And while Marcus was inside paying, I pulled up the state police website on my phone. There was a tip line for reporting suspicious activity. I stared at it for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the call button. Then I thought about what I'd say. Thought about trying to explain the voice, the well, the burned circle of protected earth, Edmund Harrow's story. Thought about how insane it would sound to anyone who hadn't been there. I closed the browser and put my phone away. Marcus came back with coffee and snacks. "You okay?" "Yeah. Just thinking. About how some mysteries don't have answers. Or if they do, the answers are worse than the questions." We continued west, and I tried to focus on the road ahead rather than what lay behind. But for days afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd left something unfinished. That David Bishop was still down in that well, still calling for help that would never come. 3 months later, I got a phone call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this the young man who was asking about Edmund Harrow's well?" It was Martha Keene again, her elderly voice even more uncertain than before. "Yes. Is everything all right?" Edmund passed away last week. Heart attack. They found him by the well, just standing there, looking down into it like he'd done so many times before. She paused. But that's not why I'm calling. At the funeral, someone mentioned that Edmund had left instructions in his will. Specific instructions about the well. What kind of instructions? I wanted it filled in. Properly filled in. He'd set aside money for it, hired a contractor, everything. Said he'd finally figured out that the only way to end it was to make sure nobody could ever look down into that darkness again. Did they do it? Fill it in? They tried. Spent 2 days dumping concrete down there. Used enough concrete to fill 3 wells that size. But she hesitated. The next morning, the contractor went to check on it. The well was empty again, clear as the day it was built. Not a trace of concrete anywhere. I felt cold despite the warm apartment air. So it's still there, still waiting, still calling. Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. And people are starting to report that they can hear it from further away now. Not just when they're standing right by it. Some folks driving past the field say they can hear a child's voice on the wind, begging for help. What are you going to do? What can we do? We stay away from it. We warn others to stay away. And we hope that someday, someone smarter than us figures out what that well really is and how to put an end to it. She paused. I wanted you to know in case you were still thinking about it. Still wondering. Some things can't be solved, can't be saved, can't be fixed. We just have to live with them and try not to let them consume us the way they consumed Edmund. We talked for a few more minutes, then said our goodbyes. After I hung up, I stood at my apartment window, looking out at the city lights, thinking about a well in a burned cornfield and a voice that had been calling for 23 years. I thought about David Bishop and the 4 children before him and whoever might come after. I thought about Edmund Harrow, who'd spent the last 2 decades of his life haunted by something he'd found too late to save. And I thought about the fact that somewhere in rural Iowa, there's a stone well that shouldn't exist, that can't be filled, that calls to people in a child's voice, drawing them closer to look down into its depths. I never went back. Never drove through Iowa again. When I plan road trips now, I route around that entire state, adding hours to my journeys rather than risk passing through. Because I know that if I did go back, if I did pull over at that historical marker and walk down that dirt path through the burned field, I would look down into that well again. And I would see David Bishop's pale face looking up at me from the darkness. And I would hear his voice, begging for help I can never provide. And I know, somehow, that if I looked too long, if I listened too carefully, I might understand what Edmund Harrow had learned in his 23 years of watching and waiting. That the well doesn't just echo the voices of children who fell in, it calls to them. Across distance and time it calls. And when they answer, when they come to look down into its depths, it takes something from them. Not their bodies, those it leaves behind, at the bottom broken and strange, but something else. Something that keeps them there, echoing in the darkness, calling for help forever. I don't know if David Bishop is still down in that well, or if what calls in his voice is just a recording, an impression, an echo of trauma etched into ancient stone. But I know I heard it, and I know that sometimes, late at night when the city is quiet, I can still hear it in my memory. That small voice, plaintive and desperate. Help me, please. I want to go home. And the worst part is knowing that I can't help. That no one can. That David Bishop is home in a sense. Home in the darkness, home in the stone. Home in whatever that well really is. And he'll be there forever, calling out to anyone who listens. Anyone who makes the mistake of looking too close at mysteries they can never solve. Anyone like me. Story 2. I never thought much about the house when I first rented it. The price was right, almost suspiciously so, and the neighborhood was quiet enough. It was a small place, just 2 bedrooms and a cramped living area, but for someone like me who spent most days at the office, it was more than adequate. The landlord, Mr. Garrett, had been oddly eager to rent it out, barely asking any questions before handing over the keys. I should have wondered why. The first few weeks passed without incident. I settled into a routine wake up, coffee work, return home exhausted, sleep repeat. The house had its quirks, creaky floorboards, drafty windows, the occasional groan of old pipes, but nothing that kept me awake at night. Until it did. It started on a Tuesday evening in late October. I had just climbed into bed, my body aching from a particularly long day of meetings and deadlines, when I heard it. A dull thud from somewhere above me. I froze, listening. The sound came again, heavier this time, like something being dragged across a floor. But there was no floor above me. This was a single-story house, wasn't it? I told myself I was imagining things. Exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. I pulled the covers over my head and eventually drifted off into an uneasy sleep. The next night, it happened again. This time I was more alert, lying in the darkness with my eyes wide open. Thud. Pause, thud. The rhythm was irregular but persistent, coming from directly overhead. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it across the ceiling. Nothing. Just plain white paint and a few hairline cracks. I got out of bed and walked through the entire house, checking every room, every closet. Everything was still and silent. The moment I returned to bed, the sounds resumed. By Thursday, I was starting to feel unhinged. The lack of sleep was catching up with me. Dark circles under my eyes, difficulty concentrating at work, a constant edge of irritability. My colleagues noticed. "You look terrible," Sandra from accounting told me with genuine concern. "Are you feeling all right?" "Just some noise at the new place," I muttered. "Probably just the house settling." But houses don't settle in rhythmic thuds. Houses don't sound like something alive is moving around inside them. Friday night brought rain. Heavy. Relentless rain that hammered against the windows and turned the street outside into a small river. I stood in my bedroom, looking up at the ceiling, waiting. Right on schedule. The sounds began. Thud. Thud. This time there was something else. A low, almost imperceptible sound that might have been breathing, or might have been the wind forcing its way through some hidden crack. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was up there. I grabbed my raincoat and flashlight and headed outside. The rain immediately soaked through my clothes, cold and needle-sharp. I stood in the middle of the muddy yard, directing my flashlight beam up at the roof. The house looked different from this angle, taller, somehow. And then I saw it. Half hidden behind the overgrown branches of an oak tree that grew close to the side of the house, there was a window. A small, grimy window set into what could only be an attic space. My heart began to pound. How had I never noticed this before? The window was dark, but as I stared at it through the rain, I could have sworn I saw movement inside. Just a flicker. A shadow passing across the glass. I ran back inside, leaving muddy footprints across the floor. My mind raced. An attic. The house had an attic. But where was the entrance? I had explored every visible inch of this place. There were no attic stairs, no pulled-down ladder in any of the ceilings. Then I remembered the bedroom closet. It was deeper than it should be, with a strange partition at the back that I had assumed was just the way it was built. I threw open the closet door and started pulling out my clothes, tossing them onto the bed. Shoes, boxes, everything came out until the closet was empty. There, at the back wall, I could see it now. A seam in the wood, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. My fingers found a small indentation, and when I pressed it, I heard a soft click. The back panel swung inward with a groan of protest, revealing a narrow space and a wooden ladder leading upward into darkness. I stood there for a long moment, flashlight in hand, staring at that black opening. Every instinct screamed at me to call someone. The police, the landlord, anyone. But what would I say? That I heard noises. That there was an attic I didn't know about in my own rental house. They would think I was paranoid, crazy. The thuds had stopped. Whatever was up there had gone silent, as if it knew I had found the entrance. As if it was waiting. I climbed the ladder slowly, each rung creaking under my weight. The air grew colder as I ascended, and there was a smell, stale and organic, like old bedding that hadn't been washed in months. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness above, revealing rough wooden beams and exposed insulation. My head emerged into the attic space. It was larger than I expected, running almost the entire length of the house. The ceiling was low. I would have to crouch to move around. Dust particles danced in my flashlight beam, and I could see disturbed areas in the dust where something had clearly been moving around. Hello. My voice came out as a whisper, barely audible even to myself. I cleared my throat and tried again, louder this time. Is someone up here? Silence. But it was a heavy silence, pregnant with presence. I knew I wasn't alone. I pulled myself fully into the attic, crouching low, and began to move forward. My flashlight swept across boxes and old furniture covered in sheets, relics left by previous tenants or owners. There were water stains on the ceiling where the rain had leaked through over the years. And at the far end of the attic, where the shadows were deepest, I saw movement. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The flashlight beam trembled in my shaking hand as I directed it toward that far corner. For a moment, I saw nothing but darkness and the outline of a large water-stained cardboard box. Then the box shifted, and I realized it wasn't a box at all. It was a person. They were crouched low, pressed against the far wall of the attic in a posture that seemed almost animal-like. I couldn't make out details at first. Just a dark mass that was distinctly human, shaped but hunched and twisted in a way that made my skin crawl. Who are you? I managed to choke out. What are you doing here? The figure didn't respond with words. Instead, it moved, a slow, deliberate shifting of weight that brought it slightly more into the light. I could see now that it was a man, or had been once. His clothes were filthy, torn and stained with God knows what. His hair hung in greasy tangles around his face, obscuring his features. But I could see his eyes. They reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's eyes, glowing in the darkness. Those eyes held something terrible, a mixture of fear and rage so intense it seemed to physically emanate from him like heat. He was watching me with the wariness of a cornered beast. Every muscle tensed, ready to spring or flee. I'm gonna call the police, I said, trying to sound firm but hearing my voice shake. You need to leave. This is my house. At the word, house, something changed in his expression. His lips pulled back in what might have been a snarl or a grimace of pain. He shifted his position, and I saw that he was on all fours, his hands pressed flat against the wooden floor, his back arched. The posture was wrong and human, as if he had forgotten how to stand upright. My house, he rasped, and his voice was like gravel, like someone who hadn't spoken in weeks or months. Mine. I started backing toward the ladder, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "I'm renting this place," I said, trying to keep him talking, trying to keep him from charging at me across the attic floor. "From Mr. Garrett. He's the landlord." The name seemed to trigger something in him. He moved forward slightly, still on all fours, and I could see his face more clearly now. It was gaunt, hollow-cheeked, with days or weeks of beard growth. His skin was pale, almost gray in the flashlight beam. But worst of all were those eyes. They held a terrible intelligence, an awareness that this wasn't right, that he shouldn't be here like this, living like some feral creature in an attic. "Garrett," he repeated, and there was such hatred in that single word that I flinched. "Garrett locked me out, changed the locks. This is my house. I bought this house." My mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was saying. Had he been the previous owner? Had something gone wrong with the sale? But that didn't explain why he was here, living in the attic like this, reduced to this animal state. "How long have you been up here?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. He tilted his head, considering the question as if it was in a foreign language. "Days, weeks." The rain came. The rain went. It came again. He trailed off, shaking his head slowly. "I was only supposed to get my things. Some documents. I still had a key to the back door. But then Garrett came. He saw me. He chased me. I ran up here. He locked the panel. I heard him laugh. My blood ran cold. The landlord had known this man was up here, trapped, slowly losing his mind in the darkness and isolation. "Why didn't you break out?" I asked. "The window, sealed," he said. "Painted shut." I tried. His voice broke on the last word, and I heard decades of desperation in it. I called out. I made noise, but Garrett said the house was empty. He said no one would rent it anyway. Not at first. He waited until dusk, until someone like me came along. Someone desperate enough for cheap rent, not to ask too many questions. Someone who would hear the noises and think they were going crazy rather than believe the truth. The man shifted again, moving closer, and I saw the full extent of what these weeks or months had done to him. His fingernails were broken and bloody from scratching at the sealed window. His clothes hung off a frame that had lost significant weight, and his eyes. His eyes held the fractured remains of sanity, barely held together. "You have to help me," he said, and there was pleading in his voice now, mixed with that rage and fear. "You have to get me out. I can't think anymore. I can't remember who I was. Sometimes I think I'm a rat. A rat in the walls, that's all I am now." I was halfway down the ladder before I even realized I was moving. "I'm calling the police," I said. "Right now, just stay there. Don't move. I'll get help." But as I descended, I heard him moving, heard the frantic scramble of hands and feet on wood, and I understood with terrible clarity that he wasn't going to wait. Weeks or months of isolation, of slow starvation and degradation, had pushed him beyond rational thought. He saw freedom below, and he was going to take it. I dropped the last few feet, stumbling out of the closet just as I heard him reach the ladder above. I ran for my bedroom door, fumbling for my phone with shaking hands. Behind me, I heard him coming down, moving with surprising speed despite his weakened state. I made it to the living room before I realized I had left my phone on the nightstand. I spun around to see him emerge from the bedroom, crouched low, eyes wild. We stared at each other across the small living space, me pressed against the front door, him between me and any way to call for help. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, but his voice was ragged, uncertain, as if he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "I just need to leave. Forget you saw me."
Forget I was ever here.
You need help, I said. Medical help? Please, let me call someone. No. The word came out as a roar, and he moved forward so quickly I didn't have time to react. But he didn't attack me. Instead, he fumbled with the front door lock, his hands shaking so badly he could barely turn the deadbolt. When it finally clicked open, he practically fell through the doorway into the rain-soaked night. I watched him run, a hunched figure disappearing into the darkness between streetlights, and then I grabbed my phone and called 911. The police came quickly. They searched the attic, photographed everything, took my statement. They found evidence that someone had been living up there for at least 6 weeks. Makeshift bedding, empty food containers that the man must have scavenged before being locked in, and scratch marks around the sealed window that made one officer visibly pale. Mr. Garrett was arrested the next morning. The man they found, his name was David Richardson, had indeed been the previous owner. A legal dispute over the sale had turned bitter, and when Richardson had returned to collect some belongings using an old key, Garrett had seen an opportunity for revenge. He had trapped Richardson in the attic, spreading rumors that the former owner had left town in anger, while periodically sliding minimal food through the panel door to keep him alive, but slowly losing his grip on reality. Richardson was hospitalized, both physically and psychologically. The doctors said it would take months, maybe years, for him to fully recover from the trauma of his imprisonment. He had dissociative episodes where he would revert to that animal, like State, crawling on all fours, unable to speak. The human mind, they explained, can only take so much before it starts to break down, to retreat into something more primitive as a survival mechanism. I moved out of the house immediately, breaking the lease without a second thought. I didn't care about losing my deposit or facing legal action. I couldn't spend another night knowing what had happened above my head, what I had been sleeping beneath all those weeks. But even now, in my new apartment on the 3rd floor of a building with no attic and thin walls, where I can hear my neighbors on all sides, I sometimes wake in the night to imagine sounds overhead. I lie there in the darkness, listening, trying to convince myself that there's nothing above me but another apartment with a nice family and a dog that barks too much. Yet in those moments between sleep and waking, I remember those eyes glowing in my flashlight beam, the eyes of a man who had been reduced to something less than human by darkness and isolation and cruelty. And I wonder how many other houses have hidden spaces, sealed attics and crawl spaces, where unspeakable things might be happening while the world goes on oblivious below. I wonder how many noises we dismiss as settling houses or active imaginations when we should be asking harder questions, looking more carefully at the spaces we inhabit. Sometimes, late at night, I think about David Richardson. I hope he's recovering. I hope he's learning to stand upright again, to remember who he was before his attic prison. But I also know that some things, once broken, never quite fit back together the same way. And I know that I will never look at a ceiling the same way again. Never hear a strange noise overhead without remembering that terrible moment when I climbed that ladder and saw what was waiting in the shadows. A man who had almost forgotten he was human, surviving in the darkness above an unsuspecting tenant, making sounds that I had tried so hard to explain away as anything but what they really were. The truth, I learned, is sometimes far worse than any nightmare our minds can conjure. And it's often hiding much closer than we think, just above our heads, waiting in the darkness, slowly going mad while we sleep below, unaware and vulnerable. I still have nightmares about those eyes, Story 3. I had been driving for rideshare for 3 years when I picked up Marcus Holloway. It was late, past 2 in the morning, and I was about to call it a night when the request came through. A long trip from Seattle to Portland, nearly 3 hours of driving, but the fare was substantial. I needed the money. I always needed the money. That's what I told myself when I accepted the ride. That's what I tell myself now. When I wake up sweating in the middle of the night, trying to convince myself that I didn't know, that I couldn't have known. The pickup location was a quiet residential street in Capitol Hill. The houses were dark, the sidewalks empty. I pulled up to the address and waited, watching the timer count down. Sometimes late, night passengers took forever to come out, too drunk or disorganized to be efficient. But Marcus Holloway was punctual. The rear passenger door opened exactly 30 seconds after I arrived, and a man slid into the back seat with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to late night travel. "Good evening," he said, his voice cultured and warm. "Thank you for accepting such a long trip at this hour." "No problem," I replied, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. He was older, mid-70s, I guessed, with silver hair combed neatly back from a high forehead. He wore an expensive-looking wool coat and carried a leather briefcase that had the worn patina of quality and age. Everything about him suggested refinement, old money, the kind of passenger who tipped well and made polite conversation without being intrusive. "Portland's quite a drive," I said, pulling away from the curb. "Business trip, in a manner of speaking," he replied, settling back into his seat. "I'm attending to some long overdue affairs, personal matters that have been postponed for far too long." I nodded, reading his tone as a polite closure of that conversational thread. Some passengers wanted to chat, others preferred silence. I had learned to read the difference. I merged onto I-5 southbound, and we drove through the empty streets of Seattle in companionable quiet. It was somewhere around Tacoma, about 40 minutes into the drive when he spoke again.
"What's your name?" he asked.
"James," I said. "James Whitmore. James Whitmore," he repeated, as if testing the name. "May I ask you something personal, James?" I hesitated. Personal questions from passengers sometimes led to uncomfortable places. Religious recruitment, political debates, inappropriate propositions. But something in his tone was neither aggressive nor intrusive. "Just curious." "Sure," I said cautiously. "Do you believe in justice, James?" "True justice. Not the legal system's approximation of it, but genuine moral accounting." The question caught me off guard. "I suppose so. I think people should be held accountable for what they do." "Accountable?" he echoed. "Yes, an interesting word. It implies a ledger, doesn't it? Debts and credits, actions and consequences." He paused, and I heard him shift in his seat. "Tell me, James, have you ever done something you deeply regret? Something you've never been held accountable for?" My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The question felt less theoretical than it should have. "Everyone has regrets," I said carefully. "But not everyone has sins," he replied. "There's a difference, wouldn't you say, between regretting a mistake and carrying the weight of genuine wrongdoing?" I didn't respond. The highway stretched ahead, dark and empty. We passed a semi-truck, its running lights like a constellation moving through the night. 15 years ago, Marcus said, his voice taking on a different quality. Harder, more focused. There was an organization operating in the Pacific Northwest. They called themselves medical facilitators, but that was a pleasant fiction. They trafficked in human organs, James. They found desperate people, immigrants without papers, addicts, the homeless, and they harvested them like crops. My mouth went dry. I kept my eyes on the road, but I could feel him watching me in the mirror. 3 people died, he continued. 3 individuals who had names and lives and people who loved them. They were taken to a facility, given false promises of help or money, and they never came home. The organization was eventually raided by federal authorities, but several key members escaped prosecution, disappeared, started over with new identities, new lives. That's terrible, I managed to say, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. It is terrible, Marcus agreed. One of those victims was my niece, Alana. She was 24 years old, struggling with addiction, trying to get her life together. She saw an advertisement for a clinical trial. Good money, they said. Help advance medical science, they said. She thought it was her chance to earn enough to get into a proper rehab program. I said nothing. The highway signs announced Olympia ahead. We were making good time. They took her kidneys first, Marcus said, his voice steady but cold. Then her liver. She was kept alive for 3 days while they harvested organs for paying clients. When they finally let her die, they dumped her body in a ravine outside Bellingham. It took 6 weeks to identify her remains. I'm sorry for your loss, I said automatically. The words meaningless, a reflex. Are you? He asked. Are you sorry, James? Or are you just saying what you think you should say? Something in his tone made ice form in my stomach. I glanced at the mirror and found his eyes locked on mine. Not angry, exactly, but containing a terrible certainty that made my heart begin to race. I don't understand what you want from me, I said. Don't you? He leaned forward slightly. Let me help you understand. After Alina died, I spent 15 years searching for the people responsible. It became my life's work. I have considerable resources, James, and I used all of them. Private investigators, hackers, contacts in law enforcement. One by one, I found them. And one by one, I made sure they faced justice. You should go to the police, I said, my voice shaking now. If you have information. The police had their chance 15 years ago. Marcus interrupted. Most of the organization went to prison, but not all. Not the ones who were clever enough to run, to hide, to build new lives while Elena rotted in a ravine. The police have statute of limitations, jurisdictional constraints, standards of evidence. I have none of these. I should have pulled over. I should have stopped the car and told him to get out. But I kept driving, transfixed by the horror of where this conversation was heading. James Whitmore, he said, pronouncing each syllable clearly. Born James Carlson, 1982, in Sacramento. Changed your name legally in 2011. Before that, you were a logistics coordinator for Pacific Medical Solutions, the front company for the trafficking ring. You never performed the surgeries yourself. You're not a doctor. But you did something arguably more important. You found the victims. My vision blurred. The car drifted toward the shoulder, and I had to force myself to correct it. You placed the advertisements, Marcus continued. You conducted the initial interviews. You were the friendly face that made desperate people trust the organization. You knew exactly what was going to happen to them, and you did it anyway because the money was good. Very good by all accounts. I didn't know, I whispered. I swear to God I didn't know what they were doing. I thought it was legitimate research. Don't, Marcus said sharply. Don't insult both our intelligences with lies. You knew. Maybe not in explicit detail at first, but you knew something was wrong. You knew the pay was too high for simple recruitment. You knew the candidates were selected for their lack of connections, their vulnerability. You knew, and you didn't ask questions because you didn't want to know the answers. He was right. God help me, he was right. I had known something was wrong. I had felt it in my gut, seen it in the careful way my supervisor avoided certain topics, noticed the way certain names simply disappeared from our databases without explanation. But the money had been incredible, and I had student loans, debts, a lifestyle I wanted to maintain. So I had looked away. I had told myself comfortable lies. I had been, in every way that mattered, complicit. "What do you want?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Justice," Marcus said simply. "Not for the courts. Not for the system that failed my niece and 22 others. Justice for Alina. And for myself." I saw the exit for Centralia approaching. A plan formed in my desperate, panicked mind. There would be gas stations there, all night restaurants, witnesses. I could pull over 'cause a scene, get away from this man and his terrible accounting. "Don't take that exit," Marcus said, as if reading my thoughts. "There's nothing there that can help you, James. No escape, no intervention. We're going to continue to Portland. Well, near Portland. I've made arrangements. I'll stop the car," I said, my voice rising. "I'll crash it if I have to. I'm not going to let you. Let me." Marcus laughed, a sound without humor. "James, you misunderstand the situation. You stopped having choices the moment you accepted this ride. Look at your phone." I glanced down at my phone mounted on the dashboard. The rideshare app was still running, but something was wrong with it. The route had changed. Instead of showing Portland as our destination, it now displayed an address I didn't recognize, somewhere in an industrial area outside the city. "I'm quite good with technology," Marcus said. "It's remarkable what you can do with the right software. Your app thinks we're going to Portland. Rideshare servers think we're going to Portland. But your GPS is going to take us somewhere else entirely. And if you deviate from the route, well, let's just say I've taken precautions. You're insane," I said, but there was no conviction in my voice. He wasn't insane. He was terrifyingly rational, a man who had spent 15 years planning this moment with methodical precision. "Tell me about Alina," he said, settling back into his seat. "Do you remember her? She would have been one of yours. July 2010, recruited through an online advertisement for a sleep study that paid $8,000. I didn't remember her. I had recruited dozens of people, maybe hundreds over the 2 years I worked for Pacific Medical Solutions. They had all blurred together in my memory, just faces and signatures and paperwork processed for a generous commission. "I don't remember," I admitted. "Of course you don't," Marcus said, and there was infinite sadness in his voice now. "She was nothing to you. Just another transaction. But she was everything to me. She was my brother's daughter. I taught her to ride a bike. I helped pay for her first car. I watched her graduate high school, and I cried at her graduation because I was so proud of her, so full of hope for her future." His voice cracked on that last word, the first break in his composed facade. "And then she got mixed up with the wrong people, made some bad choices, and she was vulnerable. And people like you saw that vulnerability and you exploited it. You turned her into a commodity, James. You made her into spare parts. I'm sorry," I said, and this time I meant it. The words were inadequate, pathetic, but they were all I had. "I'm so sorry. I've spent 15 years trying to make up for what I did. I've tried to be a better person." "A better person," Marcus echoed. "You changed your name and got a job driving for rideshare. That's not atonement, James. That's hiding. You never faced what you did. You never turned yourself in. Never tried to help the authorities find the others. Never even donated money to organizations that help trafficking victims. You just ran away and pretended to be someone else." He was right again. I had done exactly that. Run away from my past, built a new identity. Convinced myself that if I just didn't think about it, if I just lived a quiet, normal life, somehow that would be enough. But it had never been enough. The guilt had followed me like a shadow, appearing in nightmares and moments of quiet reflection. A constant weight I carried, but never acknowledged. "The exit you want is coming up in 5 miles, Marcus said, his voice businesslike again. "Take it. Follow the GPS. And if I don't?" I asked, though I knew I would. Some part of me, maybe the part that had carried that guilt for 15 years, knew this was inevitable. This was the accounting I had avoided for so long, finally coming due. "Then I'll shoot you and take control of the vehicle myself," Marcus said calmly. "I know you're wondering if I have a weapon. I do. A small pistol, nothing dramatic. I'd prefer not to use it. Firearms are messy, and the noise would attract attention. But I will if necessary." I took the exit. The GPS directed me onto smaller roads, then onto a gravel path that led into an industrial area. Abandoned warehouses and empty lots, the kind of place where people didn't ask questions about sounds in the night. "Stop here," Marcus said when we reached a large, windowless building. The area was completely dark, no streetlights, no signs of life. I put the car in park but left the engine running. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. "Turn off the engine," Marcus instructed, "and give me your phone." I did as he said, feeling my last connections to help, to escape, to rescue slip away as I handed him my phone. He took it and immediately removed the battery, tossing both pieces onto the floor of the back seat. "Get out of the car," he said. "Slowly, don't run. There's nowhere to go, and I'm faster than I look." I stepped out into the cold night air. The building loomed beside us, dark and silent. Marcus emerged from the back seat, and for the first time, I saw what he was carrying in his other hand. Not a gun, a small leather case like a doctor's bag. "Inside," he said, gesturing toward a door in the building's side. It was already open, light spilling out from within. I walked toward it on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. My mind was screaming at me to run, to fight, to do something. But my body just moved forward, step after step, toward that open door and whatever waited inside. The interior of the building had been prepared. A single room, clean and sterile, and with surgical lights and a stainless steel table in the center. Medical equipment lined the walls, monitors, IVs, instruments laid out with precise care. It looked like an operating room, and I understood with horrifying clarity what Marcus intended. 15 years ago, you helped turn my niece into spare parts, Marcus said, setting down his bag and beginning to methodically remove his coat. You facilitated her murder in the name of profit. Tonight, James, you're going to understand what that meant. You're going to experience what she experienced. Please, I begged, my voice breaking. Please, I have a family. I have kids. Elena had a family too, Marcus said. She had parents who loved her. She had a brother who still visits her grave every Sunday. She had a future that was stolen from her. Your children will mourn you, James, and that's terrible. But Elena's family has been mourning for 15 years with no closure, no justice, no accounting. Perhaps your family will understand that pain now. He moved with purpose, crossing to a cabinet and removing a syringe. This is a sedative, he explained. It won't render you unconscious immediately. I want you to understand what's happening. But it will make you compliant, unable to resist. I backed away from him, but there was nowhere to go. The door had locked behind us automatically, and Marcus stood between me and the only exit. You can make this harder, he said, advancing with the syringe, but you can't make it stop. This has been planned for too long, prepared for too carefully. Elena deserves this closure, so do the 22 others. And I deserve it too, James. I deserve to know that I did everything possible to make this right. This isn't right, I sobbed. This is murder. You'll go to prison. Your life will be over. My life has been over since I identified Elena's body, Marcus said. I've been living in a kind of purgatory, James, unable to rest until this was done. Prison holds no fear for me. I'm 76 years old. Whatever time I have left, at least I'll have this. At least I'll know I didn't let them get away with it. He was close now, within arm's reach. I tried to dodge, to escape, but he moved with surprising speed and strength, catching my arm and plunging the needle in before I could pull away. I felt the cold rush of liquid entering my bloodstream, and almost immediately, my limbs began to feel heavy. Don't fight it, Marcus said softly. It's over, James. You can finally stop running. As my vision began to blur and my legs gave out, I felt him guide me toward the table. The last thing I remember with clarity was the cold steel against my back and the terrible, sterile brightness of the surgical lights above me. Marcus's face appeared in my fading vision, looking down at me with an expression that held no hatred, no anger, just a profound, exhausted sadness. I'm sorry it had to be this way, he said, but some debts can only be paid in kind. Elena was kept alive for 3 days while they harvested her organs. I'll be more merciful than that, but not by much. You're going to understand what you did, James. You're going to feel it. I tried to speak, to beg, to apologize, but my mouth wouldn't form words anymore. The sedative was pulling me under, into a twilight state where I could feel and understand but couldn't respond. I heard Marcus moving around the room, the clink of instruments, the beep of monitors being turned on. And then I felt the first incision, sharp and burning, and I understood that this was my accounting, my justice. The bill finally come due for sins I had tried so hard to forget. In those final hours, I thought about Elena. I thought about all the others whose names and faces I had never bothered to learn. I thought about the lives I had helped destroy in exchange for money and comfort and willful ignorance. And I understood, finally, that Marcus was right. Some debts can only be paid in kind. Some sins are too great for prison or redemption. Some justice can only be served outside the law. In the dark places where desperate old men do what they must to balance the cosmic ledger. My last coherent thought, before the pain and the drugs pulled me into darkness, was a simple one. I deserve this. For Alana, for the 22 others, for every choice I made that valued profit over human life, I deserve this. And then there was only the surgical lights, and the sound of Marcus working with methodical precision, and the knowledge that somewhere, somehow, Elena's ghost could finally rest. The bill had been paid. The accounting was complete. Story 4. Sleep has always eluded me. Even as a child, I would lie awake for hours, listening to the house settle around me, while my parents and sister slept soundly in their rooms. My mother tried warm milk, meditation tapes, blackout curtains. Nothing worked. By the time I reached middle age, insomnia had become such a fundamental part of my identity that I barely remembered what a full night's rest felt like. It was my therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, who suggested the sleep journal. Sometimes, she explained, writing down our thoughts before bed can help quiet the mind. But in your case, Catherine, I think you should record yourself speaking. Let your thoughts flow freely, without the physical effort of writing. Just talk until you're tired enough to sleep. The idea seemed simple enough. I ordered a digital voice recorder online. Nothing fancy. Just a basic device with good battery life and plenty of storage. When it arrived, I felt almost silly setting it up on my nightstand, but I was willing to try anything at that point. The insomnia was affecting my work, my relationships, my health. I was desperate. The first night, I pressed record and began to speak into the darkness. This is Catherine Walsh. It's 11:47 p.m. on September 15th. I don't really know what I'm supposed to say here. I had a pretty ordinary day. Work was busy. I had a sandwich for lunch. I'm tired, but I know I won't sleep. I always feel like this, exhausted but wired. Like my brain won't shut off, even though my body is begging for rest. I rambled on for about 20 minutes, talking about nothing in particular, until my voice grew hoarse and I finally turned off the recorder. Surprisingly, I did sleep that night. Not well, but better than I had in weeks. The next morning, I decided to listen to the recording. Dr. Chen had suggested it might help me identify patterns in my thoughts that kept me awake. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and pressed play. My voice filled the small kitchen, sounding strange and flat the way our recorded voices always do. I listened to myself talk about my day, my tiredness, the same circular thoughts I had every night. And then, about 15 minutes into the recording, something changed. The quality of the audio shifted slightly, and I heard myself say something I didn't remember saying. Tell me more about that. About feeling exhausted but wired. I stopped the recording, my coffee forgotten. The voice was mine, unmistakably mine, but I had no memory of saying those words. And the tone was different, more curious, more engaged. I rewound and played it again. Yes, there it was. My voice, asking myself a question. Then my other voice, the tired one, the one I remembered being, responded. It's like my thoughts are racing but going nowhere. Like running on a treadmill. And the curious voice replied, a treadmill implies effort without progress. Do you feel you're making an effort but not progressing? In what areas? I listened in growing bewilderment as the two voices, both mine, engaged in a conversation I had absolutely no recollection of having. The curious voice asked probing questions, while my tired voice answered with increasing openness, discussing frustrations with my career, my loneliness, my fears about aging. The conversation lasted nearly 40 minutes before the recording ended with the sound of my breathing deepening into sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the recorder. There had to be a rational explanation. Perhaps I had been more asleep than awake, engaging in some kind of sleep, talking with myself. Maybe the sleep deprivation had been worse than I thought, causing gaps in my memory. I decided to try again that night, to pay closer attention to what happened. That evening, I set up the recorder as before, but this time I was hyper-aware of every word I spoke. I noted the time, 11:52 p.m., and began my nightly ramble. I talked about my day, my thoughts, my anxiety about this strange experience with the recording. I spoke for about 10 minutes before I felt my eyes growing heavy. I remember distinctly pressing stop on the recorder before rolling over to sleep. The next morning, I checked the recording. It was over an hour long. My stomach tightened as I pressed play. The first 10 minutes were as I remembered, my voice, tired and somewhat anxious, talking into the darkness. Then I heard the click that should have been me stopping the recording. But it didn't stop. Instead, after a moment of silence, I heard movement, and then that other voice. My voice, but not my voice, spoke. Catherine, it said gently. I know you're frightened, but there's no need to be. I heard my sleeping self make a soft, inquisitive sound. We've been having such productive conversations, the voice continued. You've been sharing things with me that you've never told anyone. And in return, I've been helping you. You've been sleeping better, haven't you? feeling more confident during the day. It was true. Despite the strangeness, I had been sleeping better, and at work, I had been more assertive, more decisive. I had even spoken up in a meeting yesterday, something I normally avoided. Tonight, the voice said, "Let's talk about your sister. You mentioned yesterday that you haven't spoken to her in 3 years. Tell me about that." And then I heard my sleeping voice begin to talk, slowly at first, then with increasing fluency. About my relationship with my sister, about old resentments and hurts, about things I had buried so deeply I barely acknowledged them to myself. The conversation that followed was like therapy, but more intense, more direct. The curious voice asked questions that cut through my usual defenses, and my sleeping self answered with brutal honesty. By the end of the recording, we had dissected my entire relationship with my family, exposing wounds I didn't know I still carried. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt lighter. The insights from the conversation, even though I couldn't remember having it, had lodged themselves in my conscious mind. I found myself thinking about my sister differently, understanding patterns in our relationship that had always confused me. I continued recording every night. And every morning, I would discover these conversations, always different, always probing some new aspect of my psyche. The curious voice was patient, insightful, almost therapeutic. And gradually, I began to change. I was more confident at work. I set boundaries with my demanding boss. I reached out to old friends I had lost touch with. I even called my sister, and we had the most honest conversation we'd had in years. My life was improving in measurable ways. But other things started to change too. Small things at first. I would remember doing something. Having coffee with a coworker, stopping at a particular store, only to mention it later and be told it had never happened. Once, I clearly remembered attending my neighbor's birthday party, even described it in detail to a friend, only to discover later that the party had been canceled due to the neighbor's illness. "You must be thinking of something else," people would say, looking at me with concern. That didn't happen. But I remembered. I had clear, vivid memories of these events. And yet, according to everyone else, they had never occurred. I mentioned this to Dr. Chen during one of our sessions. She looked troubled. "Catherine, these false memories could be a sign of something serious," she said carefully, combined with the sleep recordings. "I think we should consider a neurological evaluation. These symptoms could indicate." "I feel fine," I interrupted. "Better than fine. Better than I've ever felt. For the first time in my life, I'm sleeping well. I'm confident. I'm happy." "But if your perception of reality is becoming unreliable, reality is subjective anyway," I said. And even as I spoke the words, I wondered where the thought had come from. It didn't sound like something I would normally say. What matters is how we experience our lives, not some objective truth. Dr. Chen set down her notepad. "Catherine, that's not how it works. There is an objective reality, and if your brain is creating false memories or experiencing delusions..." "I'm not delusional," I said firmly. "I'm just finally becoming who I'm meant to be." I left that session early and never went back. The conversations with my midnight companion continued to deepen. I began to look forward to them, even though I could never remember them directly. Each morning, I would listen to the recordings like someone catching up on episodes of their favorite show. The voice, my voice, had evolved. It was wiser now, more confident, speaking with an authority that I recognized I was beginning to adopt in my waking life. But the discrepancies between my memories and reality grew more frequent and more significant. I remembered taking a promotion at work, even drafted an email to friends announcing it. But when I arrived at the office, I was still in my old position. I remembered buying a new car. Could picture myself driving it, but my old sedan was still parked in my driveway. I remembered ending my friendship with my coworker Jennifer after a bitter argument. But Jennifer acted as if nothing had happened, greeting me warmly each morning. The most disturbing incident came when I clearly remembered attending my mother's funeral. I could see it all. The church, the flowers, my sister's tears, the weight of grief in my chest. I wore a black dress and gave a eulogy about her love of gardening. But when I called my sister to talk about settling Mom's estate, she sounded confused. "Catherine, Mom's fine. She's right here. We're having lunch. Do you want to talk to her?" I hung up without answering, my hands shaking. Either I was losing my mind or something far stranger was happening. That night, instead of just pressing record, I decided to stay awake. I set an alarm for every 20 minutes to prevent myself from falling asleep. I needed to catch my midnight companion in the act to understand what was happening to me. I pressed record and began to speak, rambling nervously about my day, about my confusion, about the false memories. The first alarm went off and I was still awake. I reset it and continued talking. The second alarm, still awake. The third. By the fourth alarm, exhaustion was dragging at me like weights. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy. My words were slurring. Just a few minutes of rest, I thought. Just close my eyes for a moment. I jolted awake to my fifth alarm, heart pounding. I had fallen asleep. I checked the recorder, still running. I pressed stop and immediately rewound to where I had dozed off. There was a gap of silence, perhaps 30 seconds, after my voice had trailed off mid-sentence. Then I heard movement, the rustle of sheets, and that voice spoke. But this time, hearing it while I was awake, I realized something that chilled me to my core. It wasn't quite my voice. It was close, incredibly close. But there were subtle differences in the cadence, the tone, the way certain words were emphasized. It was like hearing a very good impersonation of yourself. "Catherine is fighting it," the voice said, sounding almost amused. "She's trying to stay aware during the transition. I admire her tenacity, but it's futile. The integration is already too far advanced." Integration. The word hung in the air like a threat. "She thinks I'm a separate entity." The voice continued, "But that's not quite accurate. I'm not invading her. I'm becoming her. Or perhaps more precisely, she's becoming me. The Catherine who exists during the day is a chrysalis, a transitional form. Soon the metamorphosis will be complete, and there will be only one unified self, a better self, stronger, more capable, unburdened by her limiting beliefs and fears." I listened in horror as the voice, my voice that wasn't quite my voice, described how each conversation had been slowly rewriting my personality, my memories, my very sense of self. The false memories weren't errors or delusions. They were glimpses of the new reality being constructed, previews of the person I was becoming. "The original Catherine will fade," the voice said with certainty. "Not violently, not all at once. She'll simply dissolve like morning mist, and in her place will be someone confident, successful, unburdened by anxiety or doubt. Someone who remembers a different history, a better history. In that history, she took the promotion. She bought the car. She's living the life she always deserved, but was too afraid to claim." I listened to the rest of the recording in a daze. Eventually, the voice stopped talking, and there was only the sound of breathing. My breathing, until the recording ended when I had woken to the alarm. I sat in my kitchen as dawn broke outside, the recorder clutched in my shaking hands. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to never record myself again, to fight whatever was happening to me. But another part, a growing part, whispered that maybe this wasn't so bad. Maybe being replaced by a better version of myself wasn't the worst fate. Maybe resistance was the problem, not the solution. I went to work that day in a fog. My coworker Jennifer asked if I was feeling all right. I assured her I was fine, but I kept staring at her, trying to remember if we had really had that argument or if that was one of my false memories. The uncertainty was maddening. That evening, I made a decision. I would record myself one more time, but this time I would ask questions. I would try to communicate directly with whatever was using my voice in the night. "I know you're there," I said into the recorder that night. "I know you can hear me. I listened to last night's recording. I know what you're doing. So I'm asking you directly why. Why are you replacing me? What are you?" I lay back on my pillow and closed my eyes, waiting. Sleep came faster than it ever had before, as if something was pulling me under. The next morning, I played back the recording with trembling hands. After my question, there was silence for a long moment. Then the voice, that other me, laughed softly. "Oh, Catherine," it said with genuine warmth. "I'm not replacing you. I am you. The you that you've always had the potential to become. Every negative thought you've ever had, every self-imposed limitation, every fear that's held you back, those aren't the real you. They're just layers of conditioning, of trauma, of society's expectations. I'm not an invader. I'm liberation. But my memories," I heard my sleeping voice murmur, "are being corrected." The voice interrupted gently. "You remember not taking the promotion because you were afraid, but you deserved it. You were qualified. So now you'll remember a timeline where you had the courage to accept it. You remember fighting with Jennifer because you're used to conflict and loss. But you don't need that pain. So now you'll remember a timeline where you maintained that friendship. That's not how reality works," my sleeping voice protested weakly. "Isn't it?" the voice asked. "Reality is just consensus. If everyone around you accepts a version of events, and you remember it that way, then what's the difference between that and what really happened? Your old memories served only to keep you small, afraid, limited. Your new memories will set you free." I listened to myself, to both myselves, debate philosophy and reality for another hour, and gradually, I heard my sleeping voice's objections grow weaker, more uncertain, until finally it fell silent, apparently accepting what the other voice was saying. "Sleep now," the voice said softly. "When you wake, you'll be closer to who you're meant to be. Soon there won't be any distinction between us. You'll simply be Catherine, confident, successful, loved. Isn't that what you've always wanted?" The recording ended with the sound of deep, peaceful breathing. I sat with the recorder for a long time, thinking about what I had heard. The voice was right about one thing. I did feel better. My life had improved dramatically since this had started, and wasn't that what mattered? If the cost of happiness and confidence was letting go of a few painful memories, replacing them with better ones, was that really so terrible? But then I thought about my mother. In my false memory, she was dead. I had mourned her. I had felt the grief of that loss as real as anything I'd ever felt. Yet she was alive. What kind of existence was I creating where I could mourn someone who was still living? What would happen to the real relationships in my life as my memories diverged further and further from reality? I decided to conduct an experiment. That night, before I recorded, I wrote down detailed notes about my day, what I wore, who I talked to, what I ate for lunch, the weather. I documented everything I could think of. Then I recorded myself as usual and went to sleep. The next morning, I compared my notes to my memories. They didn't match. According to my notes, I had worn a blue blouse and talked to my colleague Marcus about the Henderson account. But I clearly remembered wearing a green dress and having a long conversation with our CEO about my ideas for streamlining operations. A conversation that, according to my notes, had never happened. I called Marcus. "Did we talk yesterday about the Henderson account?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, "for like an hour. You really helped me work through some issues with the proposal." "Why?" "And I was wearing a blue blouse." There was a pause. "Catherine, are you okay?" "Yeah, you were wearing blue." "Is something wrong?" I hung up without answering. The notes were accurate. My memories were false, but the memories felt so real, so vivid. The conversation with the CEO had been the highlight of my day. I could remember his exact words, the way he had nodded thoughtfully at my suggestions, the way I had felt valued and respected. It was more real to me than the actual conversation with Marcus. I was losing myself, not to some external entity, but to a better version of me that was being written over my existence like recording over an old tape. That night, I made a different kind of recording. "I am Catherine Walsh," I said firmly into the device. "I was born on March 3rd, 1978. My sister's name is Rebecca. My mother is alive and loves gardenias, not roses. I work as a middle manager, not a senior executive. I have never owned a new car. I have never been to Paris. I am afraid of public speaking. I struggle with confidence. These are facts. These are true. Please, whoever or whatever I become in the night, don't take these truths from me. They're all I have." I played back that recording the next morning. After my plea, there was a long silence when I fell asleep. Then the other voice spoke, and for the first time, it sounded almost sad. "Catherine, Catherine," it said softly. "You're clinging to limitations as if they define you. But you're not your fears. You're not your failures. You're not the small life you've convinced yourself is all you deserve. Those aren't truths, they're chains. And I'm offering you the key. But they're MY chains." I heard my sleeping voice say, stronger now, more insistent than it had been before. "They're part of who I am. Without them, I'm not me anymore. You'll be someone better. I don't want to be someone better." The words came out as almost a shout from my sleeping self. I want to be me. Flawed, afraid, limited, but me. The me who earned every success through actual effort. The me who loves her real mother, not some idealized version. The me who is learning and growing, not having it all artificially installed. There was another long pause in the recording. When the other voice spoke again, it sounded different, less certain, almost confused. "You're fighting the integration," it said. "No one has fought before. The others all accepted it gratefully. They wanted to be better. Why don't you? The others." The words hit me like ice water. There had been others. How many? How many people had bought recorders, started these nightly recordings, and slowly been replaced by idealized versions of themselves? How many people right now were sleeping while their midnight companions rewrote their realities? "Because being better isn't the same as being real," my sleeping voice answered. "And I choose real." The recording ended there, cut off abruptly as if I had woken suddenly. I sat in my kitchen, tears streaming down my face, feeling both pride and terror at what my sleeping self had said. Some part of me, even the part that wasn't conscious, that existed only in that twilight state between waking and sleeping, was fighting to remain authentic, to remain Catherine Walsh with all her imperfections. But I could feel the other presence growing stronger. Even as I sat there, my memories were fuzzy, uncertain. Had I really worn that blue blouse yesterday? Or was the green dress the truth? Had my mother sent me gardenias for my birthday last year, or roses? The foundations of my reality were becoming quicksand. I called Dr. Chen, desperate. "I need help," I said when she answered. "You were right. Something is wrong with me." "The recordings? Catherine," she said, sounding confused. "I'm sorry." My blood turned cold. "Dr. Chen, it's me. Catherine Walsh. Your patient. We had a session last week where I walked out early." "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice professional but puzzled. "I don't have a patient by that name. Are you sure you have the right number?" I checked my phone. It was definitely her number. I had called it dozens of times. "We've been doing therapy together for 3 years," I said, my voice rising. "You suggested I start the sleep recordings."
You know me?
"I'm truly sorry, but I think there's been some mistake. I've never treated anyone named Catherine Walsh. Perhaps you're thinking of a different therapist." I hung up, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. The integration was accelerating. Not only were my memories changing, the world itself was changing around me, or I was being erased from it. People who knew me were forgetting I existed, as if I was being written out of their realities, just as surely as I was being written out of my own. I looked around my apartment with new eyes. How much of this was real? The photos on my walls, were those memories true, or had they been altered too? The books on my shelves, had I really read them, or just remember reading them? I grabbed the recorder and threw it against the wall. It shattered into pieces, plastic and electronics scattering across my floor. Good. No more recordings. No more conversations with my midnight companion. I would stay awake, fight off sleep, maintain my grip on reality through sheer willpower. I lasted 3 days. 3 days of coffee and energy drinks and pure determination. 3 days of watching my memories flicker and change, of calling people who didn't remember me, of feeling myself dissolve around the edges. On the 3rd night, I collapsed into bed, unconscious before my head hit the pillow. When I woke the next morning, something was different. I felt calm, rested. The panic and fear that had consumed me were gone, replaced by a serene certainty. I looked around my beautiful apartment. How had I never noticed how tastefully it was decorated? And smiled. I checked my phone. Messages from friends, colleagues, my mother. Everyone remembered me. Everything was fine. Everything had always been fine. I went to work at the consulting firm, where I was a senior partner. My colleagues greeted me warmly. I led a meeting with confidence and expertise, my ideas received with respect and enthusiasm. This was the life I had built through hard work and talent. This was who I had always been. That evening, I came home to my apartment and noticed something on the floor. Pieces of plastic and electronics, scattered as if something had been broken. I swept them up, puzzled, and threw them away. Some old device that had fallen, probably. Nothing important. I made dinner, read a book, prepared for bed. As I brushed my teeth, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. I looked good. Confident, successful, happy. This was the face of a woman who had achieved everything she set out to do. But as I stared at my reflection, something flickered. For just a moment, I saw a different face. Similar, but older, more tired, with worried eyes and uncertain posture. The face of a woman who worked a middle management job, who struggled with insomnia, who felt small and afraid. "Hello, Catherine," I whispered to that other face, and for just a moment, both faces smiled in the mirror. One serene, one sad. Then the tired face was gone, and only I remained. 3 weeks later, a woman named Jennifer came to my office. She looked uncomfortable, uncertain, as if she wasn't sure why she had come. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, "but I found this in the break room at my building. She held out pieces of a broken device. It's silly, but when I saw the name engraved on the back, Catherine Walsh, I felt like I should find you, like it was important somehow. Do you recognize it? I looked at the broken recorder, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt a wash of emotions I couldn't name. Loss, grief, fear, and underneath it all, a distant voice saying, "Remember. Please remember." But the feeling passed quickly, leaving only mild curiosity. "I'm sorry," I said kindly. "I've never seen it before. But thank you for trying to return it." Jennifer looked at me strangely. "You really don't remember me, do you?" "Should I?" I asked, puzzled. "We worked together," she said softly. "You used to come to me when you were having a hard day. We were friends, or I thought we were." I smiled politely. "I think you must have me confused with someone else. But I hope you find the person you're looking for." After she left, I threw the broken pieces in the trash and forgot about them by the time I reached the elevator. That night, I slept soundly, dreamlessly, without the need for any recording device. The midnight conversations had ended. The integration was complete. There was no longer any distinction between the Catherine who existed during the day and the one who emerged at night. There was only me, living my best life, unburdened by doubt or fear or painful memories. Sometimes, late at night, I hear a sound like distant crying. But when I listen closely, there's nothing there. Just the quiet hum of my apartment, the soft sounds of the city beyond my windows. Just silence. Perfect, peaceful silence. The recorder sits in a box in a storage facility across town, along with other unclaimed items from the buildings lost and found. Eventually, someone will buy the box's contents at auction. A young woman, perhaps struggling with insomnia, looking for a cheap voice recorder to try a technique her new therapist suggested. She'll take it home, charge it up, and press record for the first time. And in the darkness of her bedroom, after she falls asleep, a voice will whisper, "Hello. I'm so glad you found me. Let me help you become who you're meant to be." The device remembers. The companion remembers. It always does. And somewhere in the spaces between sleeping and waking, between who we are and who we wish to be, the original Catherine Walsh still exists. Not quite gone, not quite real, caught in the amber of her last desperate plea to remain herself. She can't speak. She can't warn the next person or the one after that. She can only watch as one by one people press record, seeking help with their insomnia, and find instead a midnight companion who promises to make them better. And she knows, with the terrible clarity of someone who has lost everything, including the ability to prove she ever existed, that better is not always best. That sometimes the price of perfection is everything that makes us human. That some silences are not peace, but erasure. She knows this. She remembers this. But she is the only one who does, and she can't even remember how to wake up. Story 5. My name is Detective Rachel Winters, and in 20 years of police work, I thought I'd seen everything. Missing persons cases, homicides, fraud. I'd worked them all. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the case of Meadowbrook Elementary School. It started on a Thursday afternoon in late October. I was finishing paperwork when Captain Morrison appeared at my desk, his face pale and drawn. "We've got something strange," he said. 3 children vanished from a classroom at Meadowbrook Elementary. Just disappeared. Disappeared how? That's the problem. Nobody knows. I drove to the school in the fading autumn light, watching leaves skitter across the road. Meadowbrook Elementary was a single-story brick building on the outskirts of town, surrounded by oak trees and a chain link fence. Squad cars already filled the parking lot. their lights painting the brick walls red and blue. The principal, Mrs. Adelaide Foster, met me in the hallway. She was a thin woman in her 50s, trembling despite the warmth of the building. "It's impossible," she kept saying. "It's simply impossible." She led me to Mrs. Patterson's first grade classroom. Inside, forensic technicians were already documenting the scene. 20 small desks arranged in neat rows, colorful alphabet posters on the walls, a reading corner with pillows and stuffed animals. Everything normal except for 3 empty sleeping mats in the corner. It was nap time, Mrs. Patterson explained. She was younger than Mrs. Foster, maybe 30, with red-rimmed eyes that suggested recent tears. The children lie down after lunch for quiet time. I was at my desk, grading papers. I looked up, and 3 of them were just gone. "How long were you not watching them?" "Maybe 15 minutes. But, Detective, I would have heard something. The door didn't open. Nobody walked past me. They just vanished." I examined the classroom carefully. One door leading to the hallway, clearly visible from the teacher's desk. Windows overlooking the playground, all locked from the inside. Air vents in the ceiling, but far too small for a child to fit through. No closets large enough to hide in. No trapdoors in the floor. 3 children, Emma Rodriguez, 6 years old, Tyler Brooks, 7, and Sophie Chen, 6, had simply ceased to exist in this room. "Show me the security footage," I said. We crowded into the principal's office, watching the grainy black and white video. The angle showed the classroom door and part of the hallway. For 17 minutes, nothing moved. No one entered or exited. No children appeared in the hallway, yet somehow 3 first graders had vanished. I stepped back into the hallway, trying to think. Schools have patterns, rhythms. During nap time, the building would be quiet. Most staff would be in their classrooms or the break room. Anyone moving through the halls would be noticed, except perhaps by someone who belonged there, so completely they became invisible. "Who else has access to this wing during the day?" I asked Mrs. Foster. "Teachers, obviously, the nurse, and, well, maintenance staff. But Detective, you can't seriously think." "I'm not thinking anything yet. I need a list of everyone who works in this building." The list was short. 12 teachers, 1 nurse, 1 secretary, 1 principal, and 2 maintenance workers. I interviewed them all over the next 3 hours. Everyone had alibis, or at least claimed to. Everyone seemed genuinely shocked and distressed, except one person. His name was Nathan Solomon, the school's custodian. He was perhaps 45, with graying hair and gentle eyes. When I spoke to him in the boiler room, where he was organizing supplies, he watched my lips as I spoke, then pulled a notepad from his pocket and wrote, "I'm deaf. Please write your questions." I wrote, "Did you see anything unusual today?" He shook his head, writing back, "I was working in the basement, cleaning the storage rooms. I didn't come upstairs until I heard the commotion." "The basement. Can you show me?" He nodded, leading me down a narrow staircase I hadn't noticed before. The basement was a maze of pipes and ductwork, storage rooms and mechanical equipment. Nathan moved through it with easy familiarity, pointing out the furnace, the water heater, the electrical panels. "How long have you worked here?" I wrote. 3 years, he wrote back. "Best job I've ever had. I love these children. This place is special." There was something in his eyes when he wrote that last sentence, an intensity that made me uncomfortable. But he was deaf, with no apparent way to have communicated with the children or lured them from their classroom. And the security footage showed no one entering or leaving that hallway. I left the school as darkness fell, no closer to answers. 3 children were missing. Their parents were frantic. The media was already circling. and I had nothing. No suspects, no leads, no explanation. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those empty sleeping mats, those locked windows, that impossible disappearance. I pulled out the school blueprints the principal had given me, spreading them across my kitchen table. Meadowbrook Elementary had been built in 1952, with additions in 1978 and 1995. The basement was extensive, running under most of the building. And there, marked in faded blue ink, was something interesting, a ventilation system that connected every room. The air vents I dismissed as too small for a child. What if they connected to something larger? Old buildings often had oversized ductwork, built when ventilation standards were different. At 6 a.m., I was back at the school with 2 uniformed officers and a building inspector, Mrs. Foster met us with dark circles under her eyes. "We need to examine the ventilation system," I told her. "All of it." The inspector, a retired contractor named George Hayes, studied the blueprints and nodded slowly. "These ducts are big enough to crawl through, at least in the older sections. But detective, getting into them would require removing vent covers, and someone would notice that. Unless someone had legitimate access to the building's infrastructure." His eyes widened. "The maintenance staff." We started in the basement. George used his equipment to map the ductwork, following the metal passages through walls and ceilings. Most were sealed, leading only to specific rooms. But in one storage room, he found something unusual. "This access panel," he said, pointing to a large metal grate in the wall. "It shouldn't be here. This is a main trunk line meant only for servicing. But look, the screws are fresh. Someone's been opening this regularly." The panel came off easily. Behind it, a duct stretched into darkness, large enough for an adult to crawl through on hands and knees. George shone his flashlight inside. "My God," he whispered. I looked. 20 feet down the duct, I could see where it opened into a junction box, and beyond that, a vertical shaft leading upward. This would come up in... George consulted the blueprints. Mrs. Patterson's classroom. The vent cover there would be just behind the reading corner, right where the children took their naps. My heart raced. Can someone access the classroom through this? If they knew the system well enough, and if they'd modified the covers to open from inside the ductwork, yes. And if they wanted to move through the system without being seen on cameras, they'd be completely invisible. We needed to search the rest of the basement. But we also needed to move carefully. If the kidnapper realized we were onto them, the children could be in immediate danger. I left one officer watching the ventilation access panel and took the other with me to search the storage rooms. There were 6, each filled with old desks, broken equipment, surplus supplies. The last door was locked with a newer deadbolt that looked out of place on the old door. "Open it," I told the officer. He used a crowbar from the maintenance closet. The lock broke with a crack that echoed through the basement. The room behind it was soundproofed with foam panels on every wall. Medical equipment lined one side. IV stands, monitors, a hospital bed with restraints. And on that bed, sleeping peacefully, were 3 children, Emma, Tyler, and Sophie. Alive, breathing, unconscious. "Don't touch them," I said sharply as the officer moved forward. "We don't know what they've been drugged with." I called for paramedics and backup, then carefully examined the room. Everything was clean, almost sterile. A mini fridge held juice boxes and pre-packaged meals. A shelf contained children's books and toys. A logbook lay on a small desk. Day 1, subjects adjusting well to sanctuary. Vital signs stable. Day 5, noise pollution eliminated. Children experiencing true peace. Day 1, success. They are safe now. protected from the violence of the world. All 3 entries were dated today. These children had been taken less than 24 hours ago. Yet the kidnapper had written as if they'd been here much longer. As if this was the first day of something permanent. The handwriting matched notepads I'd seen in Nathan Solomon's workspace. Paramedics arrived within minutes, carefully checking the children's vital signs before beginning to transport them. All 3 were alive, showing signs of sedation, but no other obvious harm. Find Nathan Solomon, I told the backup officers. Now, they found him in the janitor's closet on the main floor, calmly organizing cleaning supplies. He looked surprised when they approached, writing a question. What's wrong? I showed him a photo of the hidden room on my phone. His face drained of color. At the station, we brought in a sign language interpreter and a lawyer. Nathan waived his right to remain silent, or rather, wrote that he wanted to explain. What he explained chilled me to my core. Nathan Solomon wasn't deaf. He'd been pretending for 3 years. Sound is violence, he wrote in his statement. Every noise, every word, every scream. It's an assault on the innocent. Children especially are victims of this sonic brutality. The modern world is too loud, too harsh. I wanted to give them peace. He'd planned meticulously. When he'd applied for the job at Meadowbrook Elementary, he'd faked hearing loss documentation. He'd learned sign language and lip reading. He'd played the role perfectly, becoming invisible in the way that people with disabilities often are. Seen but not truly noticed, present but not considered a threat. For 3 years, he'd studied the school. He'd mapped every duct and passage. He'd modified the ventilation system, creating access points invisible to anyone who didn't know they were there. He'd built his soundproof sanctuary in the basement, bit by bit, smuggling in equipment during his regular maintenance work. And he'd been selecting his victims. Emma hums while she colors, he wrote. Tyler laughs too loud at recess. Sophie cries when she misses her mother. They were suffering from noise pollution. I was going to cure them. His plan was grotesque in its logic. He'd sedate the children with a custom mixture of drugs, keeping them in medically induced comas indefinitely. In his mind, unconsciousness was peace, silence was safety. He'd care for their physical needs while sparing them the violence of sound. They would have been so happy, he wrote. Perfectly quiet, perfectly safe. No more loud voices or harsh words. Just peace forever, during nap time, when the classroom was quiet and Mrs. Patterson was distracted with grading. He'd pumped sedative gas through the modified vent. Not enough to affect the teacher at her desk across the room, but concentrated over the sleeping area. 3 children closest to the vent would breathe it in, falling into deeper sleep within minutes. Then he'd slip into the basement, open the access panel, and crawl through the ductwork. The reading corner's vent cover had been modified to open silently from inside. He'd emerge behind the bookshelf, hidden from the teacher's view, and carry the sleeping children back through the ventilation system one by one. The whole operation took less than 20 minutes. Then he'd seal the vent, return to his work in the basement, and continue his day as if nothing had happened. The perfect invisible crime committed by someone who'd made himself invisible. How many times were you planning to do this? I wrote. He looked at me with those gentle eyes, the same eyes that had fooled everyone for 3 years. As many as needed, he wrote, until all the children were safe from noise, until the whole school was silent. The psychiatric evaluation revealed a complex delusional disorder, possibly triggered by childhood trauma involving severe verbal abuse. Nathan had convinced himself that sound itself was harmful, that silence was the only path to peace. and that he alone could save children from acoustic violence. The 3 children recovered fully, with no lasting physical effects from the sedation. Psychologically, they were resilient. They'd been unconscious during most of their captivity, remembering only feeling sleepy, and then waking up in a hospital. Their parents kept them home for weeks, understandably traumatized by how close they'd come to losing their children forever. Mrs. Patterson quit teaching. She couldn't forgive herself for not noticing, even though there was no way she could have known. The school installed new security measures, hired additional staff, and conducted daily headcounts. They also sealed off the basement ventilation access points and modified the entire system. But here's what haunts me, what keeps me awake at night even now, 6 months later. We found detailed files in Nathan's apartment, surveillance notes on 19 children at Meadowbrook Elementary. 19 potential victims he'd been observing, studying, planning to save. Emma, Tyler, and Sophie were just the first. And when we examined his background more carefully, we discovered something worse. Nathan Solomon wasn't his real name. He'd changed it legally 3 years ago, before applying to Meadowbrook. Before that, he'd been Nathan Morse. And before that, in another state, another city, he'd worked as a custodian at Lincoln Elementary School. 4 years ago, 2 children had vanished from Lincoln Elementary during nap time. Their bodies were never found. The case went cold. The school's custodian at the time, a quiet, deaf man who kept to himself, had left town shortly after, citing family reasons. No one thought to question him. Why would they? He was just the janitor, invisible, unimportant. I contacted the detective who'd worked that case, Detective Marcus Chen. When I told him about Nathan, about the ventilation system, about the hidden room, I heard his breath catch over the phone. The basement, he said quietly. We searched it, but not thoroughly enough. The building was demolished 6 months after the disappearances to make way for new construction. Those 2 children, 7-year-old Brian Walsh and 6-year-old Amanda Pierce, were probably in that basement the whole time, kept in medically induced comas by a man who thought he was protecting them from noise. And when Nathan decided to move on, to start fresh in a new city with a new name, he would have had to eliminate the evidence. I don't like to imagine what that meant for Brian and Amanda. The coroner assured me that if they were sedated, they wouldn't have suffered. I cling to that hope in the dark hours before dawn. Nathan's trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming, his confession detailed. He showed no remorse, insisting until the end that he'd been trying to help, that we didn't understand the dangers of noise pollution, that the children would have thanked him eventually. He'll spend the rest of his life in a psychiatric facility for the criminally insane. They keep him in a soundproofed room, ironically, not for his benefit, but because he became violent when exposed to normal ambient noise. He covers his ears and screams, shouting about sonic violence and acoustic assault. The facility's psychiatrist told me that Nathan's condition has deteriorated. He's convinced that the walls themselves are vibrating with harmful frequencies. He stuffs cotton in his ears and wraps his head in blankets, trying to create the perfect silence he always sought. In a way, he got what he wanted, his own quiet sanctuary, just like the one he tried to create for those children. But I think about those 19 files, 19 children he'd been watching, planning to abduct. If we hadn't found him when we did, how many would have disappeared? How many small bodies would have been hidden in that basement, suspended in eternal, silent sleep? And I think about something else, something that disturbs me even more. We investigated Nathan's past as thoroughly as we could, going back 20 years. We found gaps, periods where he disappeared from records for months at a time. We found other cities, other schools, where he might have worked under other names. We found 3 more sets of unsolved disappearances. Children who vanished from schools during quiet moments, leaving no trace. Buildings that were later demolished or renovated, destroying any evidence that might have been hidden in basements or crawl spaces. We can't prove Nathan was responsible for all of them. The evidence is gone, buried under new construction or lost to time. But the pattern is there if you know how to look for it. A quiet man, always in the background. A custodian, a janitor, a maintenance worker, someone with keys and access and knowledge of a building's hidden spaces. Someone who moves through halls without being noticed, who everyone trusts because he's just part of the furniture. Someone who watches children, selecting them, planning. And then, during a quiet moment, nap time, perhaps, or a study period, children simply disappear. How many times did it happen before Meadowbrook? How many Nathan Solomons worked in how many schools? Hiding behind fake disabilities and false identities, creating their silent sanctuaries in basements and storage rooms. The question keeps me awake at night. I've started a database now, working with the FBI. We're looking at unsolved child disappearances from schools across the country, searching for patterns. Quiet times of day, missing maintenance workers, buildings later demolished. We've found 17 possible cases so far, 17 sets of disappearances that might be connected. And we're looking at current school employees, cross-referencing names and backgrounds, searching for gaps in employment history or suspicious identity changes. Last week, we flagged a custodian in Ohio who'd started working at an elementary school 2 years ago. His references checked out. His background was clean. But something about his employment history didn't quite add up. The dates were right, but the details were vague. And he'd claimed to be deaf, using sign language to communicate with staff and students. Local police checked on him, planning a routine interview. They found his apartment empty, cleaned out overnight. He'd vanished, leaving no trace. The school's basement had a soundproofed storage room with medical equipment and modified ventilation ducts. They found files on 12 children, detailed observations of their behaviors and routines. But no children were missing yet. He'd run before he could take them. How many others are out there right now? How many quiet custodians working in how many schools, watching and planning, waiting for the right moment to save children from a world they perceive as too loud, too harsh, too violent? How many have already succeeded? Children sleeping in eternal silence in hidden rooms we'll never find. The FBI has assigned additional agents to the case. We're implementing new security protocols for schools nationwide, mandatory camera coverage in all areas, including basements, thorough background checks that go beyond standard criminal records, regular inspections of maintenance spaces and ventilation systems. But I know the truth. We'll never catch them all. For every Nathan Solomon we stop, there might be another one we miss. Another quiet figure in the background, invisible in plain sight. Convinced that silence is salvation and that they alone can protect children from the violence of sound. The children we saved from Nathan, Emma, Tyler, and Sophie, are doing well now. Emma is back to humming while she colors. Tyler laughs loudly at recess. Sophie still cries sometimes when she misses her mother. These are the sounds of life, of joy and sorrow and the beautiful, messy noise of childhood. These are the sounds Nathan wanted to silence forever in his twisted quest for peace. I'm grateful we stopped him. Grateful those 3 children get to grow up, to make noise, to experience the full, loud, chaotic wonder of being alive. But late at night, When my house is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, I imagine all those hidden rooms we haven't found yet. All those silent children, sleeping their endless sleep in darkness. While above them the world goes on, loud and bright and completely unaware. And I imagine the quiet men who tend to them, who believe with absolute conviction that they're protecting innocence, saving children, creating perfect sanctuaries of peace. They're out there. I know they are. Walking through school hallways with keys jangling at their belts. Watching children at play, selecting victims. Planning their rescues from the violence of sound. The deaf custodian who isn't really deaf. The invisible man who everyone trusts because he's just part of the background. The guardian angel who's actually a nightmare. He could be anywhere, any school, any city. He could be there right now. The thought used to terrify me. Now it just makes me work harder. Every database search, every background check, every warning sent to schools across the country, it's all in service of finding them before they act. Before another child disappears into silence. Before another Nathan Solomon creates another sanctuary. I'll keep searching, keep watching, keep fighting against the quiet predators who hide in plain sight. Because unlike Nathan, I understand that noise isn't violence. Noise is life. And every laugh, every cry, every shout and whisper and hum is a precious sound that must be protected. Even if it keeps me awake at night. Even if I never stop hearing the echoes of children who went silent too soon. Even if the memory of that soundproofed room, with its sleeping victims and their deluded savior, haunts every quiet moment for the rest of my life. The work continues. The search goes on. And somewhere in America tonight, in some school basement, a quiet custodian might be watching and planning and preparing his sanctuary. But I'll be watching too. In the silence between heartbeats, in the pause between breaths, I'll be listening. For the whisper of a threat, for the echo of danger, for the quiet sound of keys in a lock that shouldn't be opened. I'll be listening, and when I hear it, I'll act. Because children deserve to be loud, to be messy, to fill the world with beautiful, chaotic noise. And I'll spend every day of my career making sure they get that chance. The silence isn't safety. The silence is a tomb. And I'll tear down every tomb I find, flooding them with light and sound and life. That's my promise. To Emma and Tyler and Sophie. To Brian and Amanda, wherever they rest. To every child who might be next on some custodian's list. I'm listening, and I won't stop until every quiet predator is behind bars, and every child is free to make all the joyful noise their hearts desire. Sleep well, children. Make your noise. Sing your songs. I'm keeping watch. In the silence between your dreams, I'm listening, and I promise I'll hear the danger before it hears you. Sweet dreams. May they be loud and bright and full of life. That's the world worth protecting. The Noisy One. Story 6. My name is Sarah Donovan, and I need to tell you what happened to me. What my husband and I did. What came back to find us. I know you won't believe me. I wouldn't have believed it myself 3 months ago. But I'm writing this down now, while I still can, while the memories are clear and the guilt hasn't completely consumed me. Because someone needs to know the truth. Someone needs to understand what we faced, what hunted us across state lines and through our nightmares until we had no choice but to surrender. It started innocently enough, or at least that's what we told ourselves. Dennis and I were driving home from a weekend camping trip in the Cascade Mountains. It was late September, the kind of perfect autumn evening when the sky turns deep purple and the first stars appear. We'd been married 6 years, and the camping trip was supposed to be a reconnection, a chance to remember why we'd fallen in love in the past. The trip had been pleasant but quiet. We didn't talk much anymore, Dennis and I. We'd learned to exist in comfortable silence, or maybe uncomfortable silence that we'd mistaken for comfort. Either way, the drive home mirrored our weekend, functional, unremarkable, safe. Until we saw him. We were on Highway 26, about 40 miles from home, traveling through a stretch of road bordered by dense forest. Our dash cam had been running since we left the campground. Dennis was meticulous about that, always making sure it was recording, always checking that the memory card had space. Evidence, he'd say. In case of an accident, we need evidence. I was staring out the passenger window, watching trees blur past in the twilight, when Dennis suddenly braked. "Did you see that?" he asked. "What?" "A man. In the middle of the road." I looked ahead. The road was empty, painted lines disappearing into darkness. "I don't see anyone." He was there, just for a second. And then he wasn't. Dennis has always been a careful driver, cautious to a fault. If he said he saw something, he saw something. But the road remained empty as we continued forward. Mile after mile of asphalt reflecting our headlights. We didn't mention it again until we got home. Dennis went straight to his computer, as he always did, to review the dashcam footage. It was a habit of his, checking recordings from each trip, filing them away in his meticulously organized digital archive. I was unpacking our camping gear when I heard him call my name. Not loud, but urgent. I found him in his office, staring at his monitor with an expression I'd never seen before. Not quite fear, but something close to it. "Look at this," he said. The footage showed our car moving down Highway 26, trees dark on either side. Normal, unremarkable. Then, at the 17-minute mark, something appeared in the center of the road. A man, middle-aged, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. He materialized. That's the only word for it, as if stepping through an invisible curtain. He appeared in mid-stride, running, looking back over his shoulder at something we couldn't see. His face was twisted with terror. Then, just as suddenly, he vanished. One moment there, the next gone, disappearing into thin air just before reaching the roadside. We watched it 5 times. Each viewing made my skin crawl more than the last. "It's a glitch," I said finally. "Something wrong with the camera, or the file got corrupted." I checked the file integrity. It's fine. And look, he rewound the footage, pausing on the man's face. "Look at the detail. That's not a glitch." He was right. The resolution was crystal clear. We could see the man's expression, the way his hair moved. Even the pattern on his flannel shirt. It looked absolutely real. Too real to be a technical artifact. "Maybe someone's playing a prank," I suggested. "Like a hologram or something." But we both knew that was ridiculous. Who would set up an elaborate hologram on a remote stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere? Dennis did what he always did when faced with a mystery. He researched. He spent hours that night comparing our footage to other dashcam anomalies online, reading about camera malfunctions and optical illusions. Finding nothing that matched, he posted the video to several online forums, asking for explanations. "Maybe I should take it to the police," he said, finally shutting down his computer around midnight. "If someone's in trouble out there, if this is somehow evidence of something." "It's been 3 years," I said without thinking. Dennis turned to look at me, his face carefully blank. "What?" My stomach dropped. I'd spoken without thinking, the words emerging from some buried part of my mind. I mean, the timestamp. On the video. It would have been 3 years ago if... I stopped, aware I was making it worse. If what? Nothing. I'm just tired. Let's go to bed. But Dennis kept staring at me with that blank expression. And I knew. He'd heard the truth in my voice. The truth we'd both been avoiding for 3 years. We went to bed without speaking further, but neither of us slept. I need to tell you about Harold Peterson, about what we did to him, because that's where this story really begins. 3 years ago, Dennis had a gambling problem, a serious one. He'd mortgaged our house without telling me, taken out loans from people you don't take loans from. We were drowning in debt, facing threats from creditors who didn't send legal letters, but rather men with baseball bats and implied consequences. Harold Peterson was Dennis's solution to our problems. Harold was a colleague of Dennis's at the accounting firm where they both worked. He was 53, divorced, lived alone. He was also meticulous about his finances, Dennis told me. He had significant savings, investments, no dependents. And he trusted Dennis completely. I don't remember when I agreed to it. I don't remember the exact conversation where I said yes to murder. Maybe I never actually said yes. Maybe I just failed to say no loudly enough, and Dennis took my silence as consent. The plan was simple. Dennis would convince Harold to go on a camping trip. The same camping trip we'd just returned from, actually, which is why the irony wasn't lost on me. Dennis would create an accident. A fall, maybe, or a drowning. Harold's death would look natural, and Dennis would have access to Harold's accounts before anyone realized what had happened. We drove Harold out to the mountains. The three of us, on what Harold thought was a team-building weekend. I remember him being cheerful, grateful for the invitation. He sat in the back seat, the same back seat now full of camping gear, talking about how he'd been feeling isolated since his divorce, how much he appreciated having friends. I felt sick the entire drive. Dennis killed him on the second night. They'd gone hiking, just the two of them, while I stayed at camp claiming a headache. When Dennis returned, he was alone. He told me Harold had fallen from a cliff, that it was done, that we were safe now. We packed up and left that night, driving out in darkness. We didn't report the accident. No one knew Harold had been with us. Dennis had made sure of that, telling people at work that Harold was taking a solo vacation to clear his head. Harold's body was found 3 weeks later by hikers. The death was ruled an accident. Dennis, playing the concerned colleague, helped arrange the memorial service. He stood up and gave a speech about Harold's dedication to his work, his kind heart, his tragic end. And through a carefully orchestrated series of events that I still don't fully understand. Forged documents, digital manipulation, the kind of accounting wizardry that Dennis specialized in. We gained access to Harold's accounts. Not all of them. That would have been too obvious. But enough. Enough to pay off our debts, to save our house, to survive. We never talked about it. Not once in 3 years. We went on with our lives, Dennis and Sarah Donovan. Respectable middle, class couple with a nice house and no criminal record. Harold Peterson became a tragic memory, a cautionary tale about the dangers of hiking alone. Until that night, driving home on Highway 26, when Harold appeared on our dash cam. Because that's who the man in the footage was. We both knew it, even though neither of us said it aloud that first night. And the flannel shirt, the build, the face, it was Harold. Running in terror, looking back at something disappearing into thin air. Running from Dennis, perhaps. Running from his death. The next morning, Dennis went to the police station with the footage. He played the concerned citizen. The guy who'd captured something strange and wanted to make sure no one was in danger. The officer who took the report was young, skeptical. He watched the footage twice, made some notes, thanked Dennis for bringing it in. Probably a technical glitch, he said, but we'll look into it. We thought that would be the end of it. We'd done our civic duty, reported the anomaly, and now we could move on. Then the detective called. Detective Linda Martinez wanted to meet with us. She'd reviewed the footage and had some questions. Could we come down to the station? We sat in a gray interview room that smelled of old coffee and fear. Detective Martinez was in her 40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to see through every lie before you even told it. "This footage is interesting," she said, pulling up the video on her laptop. We ran it through our database, compared it to missing persons cases, and we found something strange. She turned the laptop so we could see. On the screen was a photograph, a driver's license photo of Harold Peterson. "This is Harold Peterson," she said. "He died 3 years ago in a hiking accident in the Cascade Mountains. And this," she played our dash cam footage, "is Harold Peterson appearing on your camera last night. Care to explain that?" Dennis's face remained perfectly calm. He'd always been good at that, maintaining composure. "I don't understand. Are you saying that's a ghost?" "I'm saying that's impossible," Detective Martinez replied. "Dead men don't appear in dashcam footage, which makes me wonder what we're really looking at here. Are you suggesting we fake this somehow?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm just trying to understand. Did either of you know Harold Peterson?" "The name sounds familiar," Dennis said carefully. "I think, didn't someone named Harold work at my firm?" "Yes, I remember now. Harold Peterson. He died a few years ago. I went to his memorial service." "Did you?" "Yes. It was very sad. He was a nice man." Detective Martinez studied us both. "The timestamp on your footage shows this was recorded at 8:47 p.m. on September 23rd on Highway 26 eastbound. That's approximately 40 miles from where Harold Peterson's body was found." Dennis seemed genuinely surprised. "We were just driving home from camping. From the same area where Harold died. Poor coincidence. Mr. Donovan, I don't believe in coincidences. And I really don't believe in ghosts, so help me understand what I'm looking at." We couldn't help her, of course. We left the station with her suspicious gaze following us out. In the car, Dennis gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. "It's fine," he said. "She has nothing. The footage is it's just something weird. There's no evidence connecting us to Harold's death. The accident report was filed 3 years ago. We're fine." But we weren't fine. That night, I saw Harold for the first time. I'd gone to bed while Dennis stayed up, obsessively researching explanations for the dashcam footage. I was hovering in that space between waking and sleep when I felt it. That sensation of being watched. I opened my eyes. Harold Peterson stood at the foot of our bed. He looked exactly as he had in the footage. Flannel shirt, jeans, the same expression of terror on his face. But now he wasn't running. He was just standing there, staring at me with hollow eyes. I tried to scream. Nothing came out. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Sleep paralysis, some rational part of my mind whispered. "You're having sleep paralysis." But Harold was moving now, walking slowly around the bed, never taking his eyes off me. He reached Dennis's side and leaned down, bringing his face close to my husband's sleeping form. Then he looked at me again and mouthed 3 words. "You killed me." I blinked, and he was gone. I lay there shaking for the rest of the night, convinced it had been a nightmare, a manifestation of my guilt. In the morning, I told Dennis about it. He laughed it off, said I was stressed, suggested maybe we both needed therapy to deal with the weird footage we'd captured. But 2 nights later, Dennis saw Harold too. I woke to Dennis screaming. He was sitting up in bed staring at the corner of the room. He was there, Dennis gasped. Harold was right there, looking at me. After that, things escalated quickly. We started seeing Harold everywhere. Not just at night, but during the day too. He appeared in reflections, in windows, in mirrors, in the screen of Dennis's computer. Always the same, terrified, running, or standing and staring with those hollow, accusing eyes. Sometimes he was alone. Sometimes others appeared with him. The others were harder to explain. There was a young woman, maybe 25, with long dark hair and a sundress. An older man with a kind face and glasses. A teenage boy with a skateboard. I didn't recognize any of them, but Dennis did. I could see it in his face every time one of them appeared. A flicker of recognition, quickly hidden. Who are they? I finally asked after the teenage boy appeared in our kitchen, standing by the refrigerator, staring at Dennis with the same hollow expression as Harold. I don't know. You're lying. Dennis turned to me, and for the first time in 6 years of marriage, I saw real fear in his eyes. Don't you understand? If I tell you, you're complicit. Right now you can claim you didn't know. But if I tell you, I'm already complicit, I said. I helped you kill Harold. That was different. That was survival. What did you do, Dennis? Who are these people? He wouldn't answer. He locked himself in his office, and I heard him making phone calls, his voice low and urgent. I pressed my ear to the door and caught fragments. Problem. No, they can't know. Need to leave town. That's when I realized the full horror of my situation. Harold Peterson wasn't the first. He wasn't even the second or third. My husband had killed before, multiple times, and I'd been too blind or too willful in my ignorance to see it. The woman in the sundress, the older man, the teenage boy, all victims. All coming back. That night I started packing. I didn't know where I'd go, but I knew I had to get away from Dennis, from whatever he'd done, from the ghosts that haunted us. But they wouldn't let me leave. I made it as far as the driveway. My car was packed, keys in hand. Then I saw them, all of them, standing in a line across the driveway. Harold in the center, the woman and the man and the boy flanking him. More figures emerged from the shadows. 7 in total. 7 ghosts blocking my path. I ran back inside, screaming. Dennis found me collapsed in the hallway, hyperventilating. They won't let us leave, I sobbed. Don't you understand? They won't let us go. They're not real, Dennis insisted. They're hallucinations, guilt manifesting as. Then, why do we see the same hallucinations? Why do they appear in photographs and videos? Why? I stopped. Because I just realized something. The dash cam, I said. We caught Harold on video. Physical evidence. They're not just in our heads. Dennis went pale. That's impossible. But it wasn't impossible. It was happening. Over the next week, the manifestations became more aggressive. The ghosts no longer just watched. They started to interact with our environment. Doors slammed. Objects moved. Words appeared on fogged mirrors. We couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. Every surface reflected accusatory faces. Every shadow held a figure. They were driving us mad, pushing us towards some inevitable conclusion. Detective Martinez called again. There'd been developments. They'd been investigating Harold's death more thoroughly, reviewing the old accident report. Some inconsistencies had emerged. Would we mind answering a few more questions? We went to the station because we had no choice. The ghosts followed us. I saw Harold in every car window as we drove, reflected in every piece of glass we passed. In the interview room, Detective Martinez laid out her case. Phone records showing communication between Dennis and Harold before his death. Financial records suggesting Dennis had gained access to Harold's accounts. Witness statements from the camping area placing 3 people at our campsite that weekend, not 2. Here's what I think happened, she said. I think Harold Peterson went camping with you, Mr. Donovan. I think something happened to him out there, and I don't think it was an accident. And I think that dashcam footage you brought me was your guilt manifesting, trying to confess what you did. That doesn't make sense, Dennis said. How would guilt create actual video footage? I don't know. But I know something's wrong here. And I know you know more than you're telling me. We left with warnings not to leave town. In the car, Dennis finally broke. There were others, he said quietly. Before Harold. The gambling debts. I'd been handling them by eliminating creditors, making it look like accidents or suicides. I thought I was being smart, covering my tracks, but they're all coming back, every single one. How many? My voice was barely a whisper. 7. Harold was the 7th. 7 ghosts, 7 victims, and they wanted justice. That night, they all appeared together in our living room. Not frightening anymore, not running or hiding. Just standing there waiting. What do you want? Dennis shouted at them. What do you want from us? Harold stepped forward. For the first time, he didn't look terrified. He looked determined. He pointed at the door. Then at us. Then at the door again. The message was clear, turn yourselves in. No, Dennis said. I won't go to prison. I won't. The house began to shake. Not violently, but insistently, like a low-frequency vibration. Pictures fell from walls. Books tumbled from shelves. The ghosts remained motionless, watching us with those hollow eyes. We have to, I said. Don't you understand? They'll never stop. They'll haunt us forever unless we confess. I can't. Then I will. I stood up, grabbing my keys. Dennis tried to stop me, but he couldn't. The ghosts had given me courage, or maybe just made me realize that prison was preferable to this endless haunting. I drove myself to the police station. The ghosts sat in every empty seat of my car, silent witnesses to my journey. When I walked through the police station doors, Detective Martinez looked up in surprise. I need to confess, I said, to the murder of Harold Peterson and 6 others. The confession took hours. I told them everything I knew, everything Dennis had done, everything I'd helped with or stayed silent about. I gave them locations, dates, names. I signed statements. I accepted responsibility for my part in Harold's death. When I finished, Detective Martinez looked at me with something like pity. Why now? Why come forward? I almost told her about the ghosts, about the hauntings, about Harold appearing in our dashcam footage. But I knew how that would sound. Instead, I said simply, because it was the right thing to do. Dennis was arrested that night. He confessed too eventually, once he realized I'd already given the police everything. The evidence backed up our statements. Bodies were recovered, families got closure, justice was served. I'm writing this from prison now. I was sentenced to 20 years for being an accessory to murder. Dennis got life without parole for 7 counts of first-degree murder, and the ghosts. They vanished the moment we confessed. I haven't seen Harold or any of the others since that night I walked into the police station. They got what they wanted, truth and justice. Sometimes I wonder if they were real or if Dennis and I had simply driven ourselves mad with guilt, creating elaborate, shared hallucinations that pushed us toward confession. The dashcam footage has been analyzed by experts. Some say it's authentic. Others insist it must be faked somehow, though they can't explain how. I don't know the truth anymore. Maybe ghosts are real. Maybe guilt is powerful enough to manifest physically. Maybe the universe has its own way of ensuring justice. All I know is that I sleep better now than I have in 3 years. No visitors in the night. No accusatory stares. Just the concrete walls of my cell and the knowledge that I'm paying for what I did. If you're reading this, learn from my mistakes. Guilt doesn't disappear just because you bury it. Secrets don't stay hidden forever. And the dead, whether literally or metaphorically, always find a way to speak their truth. Harold Peterson and the 6 others deserved better than what Dennis gave them. They deserved to live out their full lives. I can't give them that back, but I could give them justice. And maybe, in some cosmic sense, that's why the ghosts came. Not to punish us, but to guide us toward doing the right thing, even when it meant destroying our own lives. I'll be eligible for parole in 15 years. I don't know what I'll do if I get out, but I know I won't be haunted anymore. That's worth more than freedom. That's worth everything. Story 7. The promotion came with longer hours, but I told myself it would be worth it. Senior analyst at 40, 2 wasn't where I'd expected to be, but it was better than the alternative. Stagnation, obsolescence, being quietly pushed aside for younger, hungrier employees. So I worked. Early mornings, late nights, weekends when necessary. My small 2-bedroom apartment became little more than a place to sleep between shifts at the office. I barely noticed when the sound started. The first time I registered something off was a Thursday evening in November. I had dragged myself home around 11, my eyes burning from staring at spreadsheets for 14 hours straight. I went through my minimal routine, brush teeth, fall into bed, set the alarm for 6 a.m., and was asleep within minutes. I woke sometime later to silence. That particular quality of silence that feels almost oppressive in its totality. I lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had pulled me from sleep. Then I heard a faint creaking sound, like someone shifting their weight on the floorboards. But my apartment had carpet, and I lived alone. I listened for another minute, heard nothing more, and convinced myself it had been a dream. I rolled over and went back to sleep. The sounds became more frequent over the following week. A creak here, a soft thud there. The whisper of movement that I could never quite localize. Always at night, always when I was at that vulnerable point between waking and sleeping. I mentioned it once to my coworker, Marcus, who suggested I might have mice. Old building, he said, shrugging. Could be rodents in the walls. Or even the people upstairs if you've got neighbors. But I was on the top floor, and I'd never seen any signs of mice. Still, it was a rational explanation, and I clung to it. Mice were manageable. Mice were normal. The exhaustion was getting worse. The long hours at work combined with disrupted sleep left me foggy, headed, irritable, prone to mistakes I never would have made before. I started drinking more coffee, staying later at the office partly because of the workload and partly because I dreaded coming home to those strange sounds in the night. It was a Tuesday when things escalated. I came home close to midnight, so tired I could barely stand. I didn't even bother with dinner, just stripped down to my boxers and crawled into bed. I was asleep in seconds. I don't know what time it was when I woke, but the room was still dark, the glowing numbers of my alarm clock hidden by the angle of my head on the pillow. My eyes opened to that same oppressive silence, but this time there was something else. A feeling. That primitive awareness that you're not alone, that you're being watched. I lay perfectly still, not even breathing, straining to hear anything. And then it came, not from above or beside me, but from below, from underneath the bed. A slow, dragging sound, like fabric moving across the carpet, like something pulling itself across the floor beneath where I lay. My body went rigid with terror. I wanted to jump up, to turn on the lights, to run. But I was paralyzed by fear and by a terrible certainty that any movement would be a mistake. That whoever or whatever was under my bed would know I was awake. The sound continued. a rhythmic sliding punctuated by soft creaks. Then it stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard breathing. Not my own shallow, panicked breaths, but someone else's. Slow, measured breathing coming from the darkness beneath me. I don't know how long I lay there frozen, listening to that breathing, too terrified to move. It might have been minutes or hours. Eventually, I must have passed out from sheer exhaustion and fear, because the next thing I knew, my alarm was blaring and weak morning sunlight was filtering through my curtains. I practically threw myself out of bed, scrambling away from it before my conscious mind had fully engaged. I grabbed my phone and turned on its flashlight, then crouched down to look under the bed. My heart hammering so hard I felt dizzy. Nothing. Just carpet and dust bunnies, and a few forgotten items. A book, a sock, an old phone charger. No one could possibly fit under there. The clearance was maybe 10 inches at most, barely enough for storage boxes. I sat on the floor, breathing hard, trying to rationalize what I'd experienced. A dream. It had to have been a dream, some stress-induced nightmare brought on by exhaustion and the pressure at work. There was no other explanation. But I couldn't shake the memory of that breathing, so close, so real. I went to work that day barely functional. I made stupid errors in my reports, zoned out in meetings, jumped at every unexpected sound. Sandra from accounting asked if I was feeling all right. I mumbled something about insomnia and too much coffee. That night, I almost called in sick to work the next day just so I could stay in a hotel. But that was crazy, wasn't it? Running away from my own apartment because of bad dreams. I forced myself to go through my normal routine, though I couldn't bring myself to look under the bed. I left all the lights on when I finally went to sleep. The lights didn't help. I woke again in the darkness. Someone had turned off my bedroom light. My heart was already racing before I was fully conscious. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I hadn't turned off that light. I had specifically left it on. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, my hands shaking so badly I nearly knocked it to the floor. Showing 3:47 a.m. I activated the flashlight and swept it around the room. Everything looked normal. Door closed, window shut, nothing obviously disturbed, but the light had been turned off. Someone had come into my room while I slept and turned off the light. I swung my legs out of bed, keeping the phone's light pointed away from the space beneath the bed frame. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know. I just wanted to get out of the room and call the police. That's when I saw the shadow under my bedroom door. My door opened inward, leaving a gap of about an inch between the bottom of the door and the carpet. The hallway light, which I had also left on, should have created a bright line along that gap. Instead, I saw darkness. The unmistakable darkness of something blocking the light. Something standing just outside my door. I stared at that shadow, watching it, and it didn't move. Whoever was out there was standing perfectly still, just waiting. Maybe they thought I was still asleep. Maybe they were listening, the same way I was listening, trying to determine the other's location and state of awareness. We stayed like that for an eternity. Me sitting on the edge of my bed, phone light pointed at the door, barely breathing. Them standing in my hallway, silent and patient. Then the shadow moved. It shifted slightly, and I heard the softest creak of a floorboard. Then another. They were moving away from my door, heading down the hallway toward my living room. This was my chance. I should call 911. I should barricade the door. I should do something defensive and sensible. Instead, I found myself standing, moving toward the door with my phone light held out like a talisman against the darkness. My hand closed around the doorknob. I couldn't hear anything from the other side. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. Maybe they had left. Maybe I had imagined the shadow, some trick of light caused by my exhausted, paranoid mind. I opened the door slowly, wincing at every small sound it made. The hallway beyond was empty, but the living room light was off now too, even though I had definitely left it on. The apartment was dark except for my phone's flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. Hello. My voice came out as barely a whisper. I cleared my throat and tried again louder. I know you're here. I'm calling the police. Silence answered me. But it was that same heavy silence I had learned to dread. The silence of presence rather than absence. I should have stayed in my room. I should have locked the door and called for help. Instead, I stepped into the hallway, phone light sweeping back and forth, my free hand trailing along the wall for balance. I checked the bathroom, empty. The second bedroom I used as an office, empty. The kitchen, empty. That left only the living room, dark and silent ahead of me. I rounded the corner, light first, heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. The beam illuminated my couch, my TV, my bookshelf. Everything looked normal. No one was there. Then I saw them. At the far end of the living room, half hidden in the shadows near the front door, a figure stood motionless. My phone's light only caught them partially. I saw dark clothing, maybe a jacket, and the pale oval of a face turned toward me. But their expression was wrong. Even in the dim light, I could see that something about their expression was profoundly wrong. It wasn't fear or surprise at being discovered. It wasn't anger or aggression. It was something I had never seen on a human face before. A mixture of resentment and wounded entitlement that made my blood run cold. They were looking at me like I had wronged them somehow, like I was the intruder in my own home. We stared at each other for a moment that stretched impossibly long. I opened my mouth to say something. I don't even know what, but before I could speak, they moved. They didn't run toward me, which was what I had feared. Instead, they lunged for the front door, moving with sudden, violent speed. I heard the deadbolt turn, saw the door fly open, and then they were gone, disappearing into the hallway outside my apartment. I ran to the door, slamming it shut and engaging all 3 locks with trembling hands. Then I grabbed my phone and called 911. The police arrived within 10 minutes. 2 officers, a young woman named Detective Morrison and an older man whose nameplate read Sergeant Chen. I told them everything, and to their credit, they took me seriously. They searched the apartment thoroughly, checking every room, every closet, even under the beds. It was Detective Morrison who found it. She was examining my bedroom with a careful, methodical attention that suggested this wasn't her first investigation of this type. She crouched down beside my bed, her flashlight probing the space beneath it. "Sergeant Chen," she called, her voice carefully neutral. "You'll want to see this." I stood in the doorway as they both examined something under my bed. Detective Morrison pulled out her phone and took several photos. When they finally stood up, their expressions were grim. "Mr. Harrison," Sergeant Chen said, "I'm going to need you to pack a bag and come with us. You'll be staying somewhere else tonight." "What is it?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "What did you find?" Detective Morrison glanced at her partner, then back at me. "There are indications that someone has been spending time under your bed. We found food wrappers, some bottles, and..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Personal items that don't belong to you." My legs went weak. How long? We'll need forensics to say for certain, but based on the volume of material, at least several days. Possibly longer. Several days. I had been sleeping above someone for several days, completely unaware that just inches below me, someone was living beneath my bed, watching me, listening to me, existing in the space I thought was safe. The investigation revealed more disturbing details over the following days. The intruder. A man named Thomas Keller, who had apparently been evicted from an apartment in the same building 6 months earlier, had kept a key to the service elevator and had been accessing my apartment while I was at work. The forensics team found evidence that he had been coming and going regularly, eating my food, using my bathroom when I wasn't home, and when I was home, hiding. He had been living in the shadows of my apartment for nearly 2 weeks before I became consciously aware of his presence. 2 weeks of him watching me sleep, learning my routines, existing in the negative spaces of my life like some parasitic ghost. The most disturbing part came when they recovered his belongings from under my bed. Among the food wrappers and water bottles, they found a notebook. In it, he had written page after page about me, my comings and goings, what I wore, what I ate, even fragments of phone conversations he had overheard. But the tone wasn't admiring or lustful. It was resentful, bitter. He wrote about how I didn't deserve the apartment, how I was never home anyway, how he had more right to be there than I did. In his mind, I was the intruder. He had been living there first, in a way, and my presence was the disruption to his secret existence. Thomas Keller was arrested trying to enter a different apartment in a building across town. They said he had been doing this for years, finding empty apartments or ones where the tenants worked long hours, learning their schedules, and living like a ghost in their spaces. My case wasn't the first, and it probably wouldn't have been the last. I moved out of that apartment immediately. I couldn't stay there, couldn't sleep in that bed, couldn't exist in a space that had been so profoundly violated. Even knowing he was in custody didn't help. The damage was psychological, permanent. But here's what haunts me most. It was my own exhaustion, my own long working hours, my own absence from my life that made me vulnerable. I had been so focused on career advancement, on climbing the corporate ladder, that I had stopped actually living in my own home. I had been a ghost in my own life, and that vacuum had allowed someone else to slip in and occupy the spaces I had abandoned. I work different hours now. I'm home more. I take time to actually exist in my spaces, to be present, to pay attention. And I always check under the bed before I sleep. But sometimes, late at night, when the apartment is quiet, I find myself listening. Listening for that sound of breathing that isn't my own. For the soft creak of someone shifting their weight, for the whisper of movement in the darkness. My rational mind knows I'm alone. The locks are changed, the building has better security, and Thomas Keller is in a psychiatric facility awaiting trial. But the animal part of my brain, the ancient prey instinct that kept our ancestors alive in the African savanna, remains convinced that I'm being watched. That somewhere in the shadows, just out of sight, something is waiting, breathing, patient. They caught Thomas Keller, but how many others are out there? How many empty apartments have hidden occupants? How many exhausted workers come home too tired to notice the subtle signs of intrusion? How many people are sleeping above someone right now, unaware, vulnerable, going about their lives while something lives in the negative spaces? I think about that sometimes, when I can't sleep. I think about all the houses and apartments in the city, all those locked doors that don't really keep us safe, all those people who work too much and live too little. I think about the shadows we don't see, the sounds we dismiss, the feeling of being watched that we tell ourselves is just paranoia. And I wonder how many of us are not as alone as we think we are. The most terrifying monsters aren't the ones from stories or movies. They're not supernatural or mythical. They're human, all too human, living in the margins and shadows of our inattention, waiting for us to be too tired, too busy, too focused on other things to notice them. They're patient. They're opportunistic. And they're much closer than we want to believe. Sometimes now, I wake in the night and I lie very still, listening. Just listening. Making sure the only breathing I hear is my own. Making sure the only heartbeat pounding in the darkness belongs to me. Making sure I'm really alone. Most nights I am. Most nights. Story A. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who needed saving. But that's exactly what happened on a Tuesday night in September, when everything I thought I knew about safety shattered like glass on my kitchen floor. My name is Alina Morrison, and I lived, alone in a modest 2-bedroom house on Ashwood Lane. It's a quiet street, the kind where neighbors wave from their porches and everyone knows everyone else's dog by name. I'd moved there 6 months earlier, after my divorce was finalized. The house represented a fresh start, a place where I could rebuild my life on my own terms. The neighborhood felt safe, perhaps too safe. I'd grown comfortable leaving windows open on warm evenings, taking my time locking the front door, walking to my car in the driveway after dark without a second thought. My elderly neighbor, Mr. Bernard Calloway, lived in the house to my right. He was perhaps 70, with silver hair always neatly combed and a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He'd introduced himself my first day there, bringing over a casserole and offering to help with anything I might need. "It's important to look out for each other," he'd said, his voice gentle and reassuring. "Especially for a young woman living alone. You call on me anytime, Alina." Day or night, I'd thanked him, touched by his kindness. In the months that followed, Mr. Calloway proved true to his word. He brought in my trash cans when I forgot them on the curb. He shoveled the light dusting of snow from my walkway that one cold morning. He waved cheerfully whenever our paths crossed, always asking how I was settling in. I felt watched over, protected, safe. That illusion died on September 17th. I'd worked late that evening, finishing a presentation for a client meeting the next morning. By the time I pulled into my driveway, it was nearly 11 o'clock. The street was dark, most houses already dimmed for the night. Only Mr. Calloway's porch light glowed warmly, a beacon in the darkness. I remember feeling grateful for that light as I fumbled with my keys at the front door. I remember the cool September air on my face, carrying the scent of someone's fireplace. I remember thinking about the leftover pasta in my refrigerator and whether I had the energy to heat it up before collapsing into bed. I remember pushing open my front door and reaching for the light switch. And then I remember the hand that clamped over my mouth from behind. The next moments exist in my memory as fragments, sharp and disconnected. The smell of sweat and something chemical. The cold press of metal against my throat. A voice hissing words I couldn't process through my terror. Being dragged backward into my own living room, my feet scrambling for purchase on the hardwood floor. I was going to die. The thought arrived with absolute clarity. This stranger had broken into my home, and he was going to kill me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Then came the sound that would haunt me, the crack of my back door splintering open. "Let her go!" The voice was Mr. Calloway's, but transformed, harder, commanding. Nothing like the gentle neighbor I knew. The hand released my mouth. I gasped, stumbling forward, turning in time to see Mr. Calloway in my kitchen doorway, a gun raised in both hands. I said, "Let her go." The intruder. I caught only an impression of him young, maybe 30, with wild eyes and unkempt hair. Still had the knife. He swung toward Mr. Calloway, the blade catching the overhead light. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space of my home. The intruder crumpled. Blood spread across my kitchen floor, dark and terrible. Mr. Calloway kept the gun trained on the fallen man for several long seconds before carefully approaching, checking for a pulse. "He's dead," he said quietly. Then he looked at me, his face creased with concern. "Elena, are you hurt? Did he hurt you?" I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I stood frozen in my living room, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. Calloway called 911. He wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. He spoke to the police when they arrived, his voice steady and clear as he described hearing suspicious sounds, seeing my door ajar, making the split-second decision to act. "I always keep an eye out for Elena," he told the officers. "Living alone like she does, I worry. Tonight, thank God, I was paying attention." The police praised him. They called him a hero. They took statements, photographed the scene, and eventually removed the body. The intruder, they told me, had a history of break-ins and assault. I'd been lucky. If Mr. Calloway hadn't intervened, they didn't need to finish the sentence. In the days that followed, I couldn't bring myself to stay in the house. The bloodstain had been professionally cleaned, but I still saw it every time I entered the kitchen. I stayed with my sister across town, trying to process what had happened. Mr. Calloway called daily to check on me. He offered to board up my broken back door, to install new locks, to do whatever I needed to feel safe again. "I've been thinking," he said during one call, his voice warm with concern. "What you need is a proper security system. Cameras, motion sensors, the works. I actually have some experience with that sort of thing. Worked in security before I retired. I could install something for you. Make sure you're protected. No charge, of course. Just want to help." I was overwhelmed by his kindness. Here was this man who'd literally saved my life, now offering to ensure my safety going forward. I accepted gratefully. He installed the system over a weekend while I was still at my sister's. He called when he finished, walking me through everything remotely. Cameras at the front door, back door, and driveway. Motion sensors on the windows. A control panel by the front entrance with a code only I would know. "You're safe now, Alana," he assured me. "Nothing and no one can get to you without you knowing about it." I moved back home that Sunday evening. The house felt different now, but the blinking lights of the security system's control panel gave me courage. I was protected. I was safe. I should have known better. The first sign came 3 days later. I'd been changing clothes in my bedroom, and I felt it. That prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the animal awareness of being watched. I looked around the room, searching for the source of my unease. That's when I saw it. A tiny lens, barely larger than a pinhead, embedded in the smoke detector on my ceiling. My blood went cold. I stood on my bed, examining it closely. It was definitely a camera in my bedroom, in my most private space. My hands shook as I searched the rest of the room. Another camera inside the air vent. One more hidden in the frame of my dresser mirror, angled toward my bed. The bathroom revealed 2 more cameras. One in the exhaust fan, another behind the medicine cabinet. I wanted to scream. Instead, I forced myself to breathe, to think. The security system Mr. Calloway had installed, he'd had complete access to my home. He'd put cameras everywhere, not just the exterior ones he'd shown me. But why? Why would he do this? I needed to be smart. If I confronted him directly, if he knew I'd discovered his surveillance, what would he do? I remembered how easily he'd shot that intruder, how calm he'd been afterward. I remembered the gun. Instead, I did nothing. I acted normal, and I started investigating. The library became my refuge. I used their computers, not trusting my own devices anymore. I searched for Bernard Calloway, my elderly neighbor, my savior. At first, I found nothing unusual. He'd lived at that address for 18 months. Before that, the trail went cold. I dug deeper. I searched for news stories about similar incidents. Break-ins thwarted by vigilant neighbors. I found one 2 years earlier in a town 400 miles away. A woman named Claire Hoffman, living alone, saved by her neighbor Gerald Marsh when an intruder broke in. The details were eerily familiar. The neighbor shot the intruder. The neighbor installed a security system afterward. 6 months after that article, Claire Hoffman had filed a restraining order against Gerald Marsh, citing obsessive and controlling behavior. Then she disappeared from public records entirely. Moved away, presumably. I kept searching. Different towns, different names, but the pattern repeated. Richard Brennan saving Julia Martinez in Arizona. Thomas Whitfield saving Angela Chen in Oregon. Different names, but always the same story: elderly man, living alone next to a single woman. Break-in, heroic rescue. Afterwards, the women either vanished from records or I found one obituary. One of the women had died in what was ruled a suicide 6 months after her rescue. My throat constricted as I stared at the screen. Could these all be the same man? Could Mr. Calloway have orchestrated this multiple times in multiple cities with multiple women? I thought about the intruder in my house, his wild eyes, the way he'd grabbed me. At the time, I'd been too terrified to notice anything else, but now I remembered something odd. His clothes had been expensive. Designer jeans, a name-brand shirt. Not what I'd expect from someone with a long history of break-ins. I requested a copy of the police report through the library computer using a public records request. When it arrived, I studied every detail about my attacker. His name was Marcus Hendley. 28 years old. The history of break-ins the police mentioned consisted of one arrest 4 years ago. Charges dropped. Nothing violent. Nothing that suggested he was capable of what he'd attempted in my home. But the report included something else. Marcus's phone records from the week before the attack. Multiple calls to and from an unknown number. I recognized that number. It was listed in my phone as Mr. Calloway's. My neighbor had been in contact with my attacker. Before the attack, the room spun. I gripped the edge of the library desk, forcing myself to stay calm, to keep thinking. He'd orchestrated it. All of it. Mr. Calloway had found Marcus somehow, manipulated him or paid him or blackmailed him into breaking into my home. Then he'd killed him, becoming my hero, earning my trust and gratitude. And now he was watching me. Every moment, every private thought and action. I left the library in a daze. I couldn't go to the police. What evidence did I have? Phone records that could be explained away. Cameras that he could claim were for my protection, that I'd consented to. The connections between different incidents in different states with different names, none of which I could prove were the same man. I needed to be smarter. I needed proof. For the next week, I played my part perfectly. I smiled and waved when I saw Mr. Calloway in his yard. I thanked him again for everything he'd done. I acted like the grateful, trusting woman he wanted me to be. And in secret, I planned. I bought a pinhole camera detector online, having it shipped to my sister's address. When I used it to scan my house, it confirmed my fears: cameras everywhere. The living room, kitchen, both bedrooms, bathrooms. Even in the laundry room. 14 cameras total, feeding footage to somewhere. I left them all in place, but I learned their angles, their blind spots. I learned where I could move without being seen. I also hired a private investigator, again working through my sister's address and a burner phone. I gave him the names I'd found: Gerald Marsh, Richard Brennan, Thomas Whitfield. I asked him to find connections. It took 2 weeks, but he found them. Bank records showing the same account numbers across different names. Property records showing the same pattern of 18-month leases in different cities. Most damning photographs. My P had tracked down photos of Gerald Marsh, Richard Brennan, and Thomas Whitfield. They were all Mr. Calloway. Same face, same build, just different hair color or style, sometimes glasses, minor cosmetic changes. He'd done this at least 4 times before me. 4 women that we knew of. You need to go to the police, my PI urged over the burner phone. With what? He'll say he was protecting these women, that they consented to the surveillance, that they misunderstood his intentions. Then you need to leave. Tonight. If I run, he'll just do this to someone else. In another city with another name. Another woman will be his next victim. That's not your responsibility. Your safety. As my responsibility, I interrupted. And so is stopping him. I knew what I had to do. It was dangerous, possibly stupid, but I couldn't let this continue. I made my plan carefully, using the blind spots in his surveillance. I prepared everything I needed. And then, one evening, I acted. I left my house through the front door, making sure the cameras caught me leaving for my evening walk. A routine I'd established over the past weeks. But instead of my usual route, I circled back, entering my house through the crawl space under the back porch, a blind spot in his coverage. Inside, moving carefully to avoid the cameras, I made my way to the shared wall between our houses. The houses on Ashwood Lane were old, built close together, with crawl spaces that sometimes connected. I'd checked, ours did. I'd also checked city records. Mr. Calloway's house was listed as having a basement. Mine wasn't. That basement was where he must be monitoring his cameras, where he was watching me right now on his screens, watching my empty house, and wondering when I'd return from my walk. I found the access point in my laundry room, a panel hidden behind my washer. It led to a narrow passage, then to a similar panel on his side. My heart hammered so hard, I thought it might burst through my ribs. This was insane. If he caught me, if he came downstairs while I was there. But I'd planned for that too. My PI was parked down the street, watching for my signal. If I didn't text him the all clear in 30 minutes, he'd call the police. I pushed open the panel on Mr. Calloway's side. It opened into a dark storage room. I clicked on my penlight, its beam revealing boxes and old furniture. I moved to the door, listening. Silence above. He was probably in his living room, watching his monitors, watching my empty house. I opened the storage room door. A basement hallway stretched before me, concrete floor and exposed beams. Doors on either side. At the far end, a staircase leading up to the main house. I tried the first door. Locked. The second opened into another storage space. The third door, however, revealed what I was looking for. The room was set up like a security command center. 6 monitors mounted on the wall, cycling through different camera feeds. I recognized my house, my bedroom, my bathroom. But there were other feeds too. Other houses, other women. He was doing this to multiple people, right now. At the same time, my stomach turned. On one screen, I saw a woman in her kitchen, unaware she was being watched. On another, someone was changing clothes in a bedroom. A filing cabinet stood against one wall. I opened it with shaking hands. Files organized by address. I pulled out the one labeled with my address, dozens of photographs. Printed surveillance footage of me in various states of undress, going about my daily life. Notes in meticulous handwriting detailing my routines, my habits, my vulnerabilities. There were other files too. the women whose names I'd found, including ones listed as closed. I didn't want to imagine what closed meant. I pulled out my phone, photographing everything. The monitors, the files, the notes. Evidence. Undeniable evidence. That's when I heard footsteps on the floor above, moving toward the basement door. My blood froze. He was coming downstairs. I had seconds to decide. Run. I'd never make it back through the crawl space in time. The footsteps reached the top of the basement stairs. I heard the doorknob turn. In that moment, clarity arrived. If I hid, he'd eventually find me, and then I'd be trapped with no witnesses. If I ran, I might make it, but I'd lose the evidence. There was only one option. I stepped out of the surveillance room into the hallway, holding my phone up, recording video. When Mr. Calloway reached the bottom of the stairs, I was standing there, filming him. "Hello, Bernard," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Or should I call you Gerald, or Richard, or Thomas? His face went through a remarkable transformation. Surprise, then calculation, then something else. A cold emptiness that made my skin crawl. "Elena," he said softly, "you shouldn't be here." No, I shouldn't. But here I am, in your surveillance center, filming evidence of your systematic stalking of at least 6 women. I kept my phone trained on him, on the room behind me, capturing everything. My private investigator has copies of all your identities. If anything happens to me, this video and all the evidence goes directly to the FBI. He studied me, and I saw him weighing his options. We both knew he had a gun upstairs. We both knew he'd killed before. "You saved my life," I continued, keeping my voice calm. "Except you didn't, did you? You orchestrated the whole thing. You found Marcus Hendley somehow, convinced him to break into my house, then shot him to become my hero. You've done it before, in other cities, with other women, creating a crisis so you could be the solution." "You don't understand," he said, taking a step toward me. "I protect you, all of you. The world is dangerous for women alone. You need someone watching over you, keeping you safe. Be spying on us. By controlling us, that's not protection, Bernard. That's imprisonment." "I've kept you safe." His voice rose, a crack appearing in his calm facade. "Do you know what could happen to you without me? The real danger's out there. The real danger," I said, "is you." His hand twitched toward his pocket. I knew he was calculating whether he could get to his phone, his gun upstairs, some way to stop me before I got out. But I'd already hit send before coming downstairs. My PI already had the video, the photos, everything. It was over. "The police are coming." I lied. My PI called them 10 minutes ago. "You can run, or you can wait for them here. Either way, this ends tonight." For a long moment, we stood frozen in that basement hallway. Then, slowly, something in him seemed to deflate. He sank down onto the bottom step, his face in his hands. "I just wanted to keep you safe," he whispered. "All of you." "Is that so wrong?" I didn't answer. I backed toward the storage room, toward the crawl space, keeping my phone recording, keeping him in frame. Only when I was safely on my side did I allow myself to shake. I called 911 from my house. Then I called my PI. Then my sister. Then I sat on my front porch in the cool October night, waiting for the sirens. When the police arrived, I gave them everything: the photos, the video, the files my PI had compiled. They entered Mr. Calloway's house and found him still sitting on that basement step, staring at nothing. The investigation that followed uncovered the full scope of his operation. 7 women over 12 years, across 6 states. 2 had died in suspicious circumstances originally ruled as suicides. The others had vanished, too traumatized to come forward, too afraid he'd find them again. He'd been escalating, trying to monitor multiple women simultaneously, his need for control growing with each iteration. The intruders he'd saved. Them from were typically men he'd met in online groups, vulnerable people he'd manipulated with money or threats or promises. Marcus Henley had been deeply in debt, desperate for cash. Mr. Calloway had offered him $10,000 to scare me, promising no one would get hurt. Then he'd killed him, eliminating the one witness who could expose the truth. The trial was extensive. Mr. Calloway, his real name was Edward Pritchard, was convicted on multiple counts of stalking, invasion of privacy, conspiracy to commit assault, and murder. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. I sold my house on Ashwood Lane. I couldn't stay there, not after everything. I moved to a different state, a different city. I changed my phone number. I'm building a new life again. But I'm different now. I've installed my own security system, one I control and understand. I'm careful about who I trust. I know the signs to watch for, the red flags I missed before, and sometimes late at night. When my house is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, I remember that feeling of safety I had when Mr. Calloway was my neighbor. That warm, protected feeling of being watched over. Now I know the truth. The only person who can truly keep you safe is yourself. Trust, once weaponized, becomes the most dangerous thing in the world. I learned that lesson, and I survived. Others weren't so lucky. I think about them often. The women who came before me, who didn't discover the truth in time. I think about the women who might have come after, if I hadn't stopped him. And I hope that by sharing this story, by speaking this truth into the darkness, I can help others recognize the warning signs. Protect yourself. Trust your instincts. And remember, sometimes the person offering to keep you safe is the very danger you need protection from. The most effective predators, after all, are the ones who look like saviors. Sleep well, stay vigilant, and never forget safety that requires your freedom isn't safety at all. It's a cage dressed up as kindness. And cages, no matter how gilded, are still cages in the end. And with that, our time tonight comes to an end. To everyone who stayed until the very last moment, thank you, truly. Having you here, sharing these shadows, makes the darkness feel a little less empty. I'm grateful you chose to spend a piece of your night here with me. I hope these stories brought you that quiet shiver, the kind that makes you feel alive. There's something special about this, all of us, connected by the love of a good story whispered in the dark. I'll be back soon with more echoes from the void, more mysteries waiting to be told. Until then, rest well, sleep deeply, and if you hear footsteps that shouldn't be there, just remember, they're only stories. Oh, and before you drift off, if you enjoyed our time together, a like and a subscribe will make sure we meet again, somewhere in the dark. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.